My name is Gabrielle Casper, and I'd like to warmly welcome you to the virtual IHAN UN CSW 2020 parallel event. The time for gender equity is now. Co-sponsored with the Fordham Institute for Women and Girls in New York. The United Nations Commission on the Status of Women is the highest level international forum on gender equality and women's empowerment. It has been a yearly event for 64 years. The main theme for 2020 was the review and appraisal of the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. And the outcomes of the 23rd special session of the General Assembly and its contribution towards the full realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. During the Commission on the Status of Women, International Health Awareness Network, fondly known by its friends as IHAN, had organized a parallel event for Thursday, the 12th of March, 2020. And 19 of my medical students and 2 alumni doctors from the School of Medicine, Sydney, UNA, were invited to the event, packed their bags and were ready to go. Unfortunately, due to concerns regarding the corona disease, COVID-19, which actually ended up being quite genuine concerns as we know now, the Commission unfortunately held a procedural meeting and the session was suspended until further notification. No general debate took place. All side events planned by member states in the UN system in conjunction with CSW 64 were cancelled. All parallel events were cancelled. However, the lovely NGO CSW kindly offered to host recordings of virtual parallel events on their website. And so off we go on our new adventure in the new history of NGOs at the CSW. Now, my students and alumni are able to attend the CSW due to the generosity of several NGOs and representatives of 2 of the organizations that are with us today. So first, let me introduce Dr. Sarosh Roshan. Sarosh is founding president of the International Health Awareness Network. This parallel event is quite special because we are actually celebrating the 35th birthday of IHAN, and so several speakers will discuss a lot of the wonderful achievements of IHAN, but we are also celebrating, can you see, Sarosh's 80th birthday. So happy birthday, Sarosh. 80 years for you and a big celebration for IHAN. And I'm celebrating because it's my 25 years that Sarosh has been mentoring me and she hasn't dumped me yet. So I'm hoping she might hold on for that 25 years. So Sarosh, thank you for welcoming us to IHAN's event. Do you want to wave and say hello?
Hello, everyone. This is a historic moment for all of us. A once-in-a-lifetime awakening. I am grateful and proud of our team for making this webinar possible. Thank you.
And I'd also like to introduce you to Dr. B. Goodwin through another NGO Health Committee. She has registered many of my students over many years, invited them to present at her NGO's parallel event. Beatrice, could you wave your hand and say a few words?
I want to say that I'm very happy to be part of this, and I'm sorry I'm missing particularly the opportunity to meet some of your students this year. That's always a special reward with CSW. Thank you and good luck.
IHAN for many years has worked on many projects with the Fordham Institute for Women and Girls. During CSW, the Fordham Institute, together with IHAN, runs a Saturday program around the CSW theme and invites prominent guests and my students to present. This is due to the kindness and expertise of 2 wonderful, generous professors, Sandra Turner and Elaine Congress. So let me first introduce Sandy Turner.
Hi, Sandy Turner, and I'm really pleased to welcome you all to the Fordham Institute and Women and Girls 10th Annual Conference in collaboration with CSW IHAN and IHAN, and our 4th annual collaboration with Gabrielle Casper and the University of Notre Dame. As you know, this conference had to be canceled in March because of the pandemic. But in many ways, actually, I think having it now has allowed us to have many more national and international speakers, as well as all of our Gabrielle students, some of our students, our faculty member. So in some ways, I think we're really pleased that we've been able to expand the conference to have so many people, including our wonderful poet, Suzanne, who's here. And I mean, just there's so many people from so many different countries, just from Bangladesh, from where else? We're from
Nigeria.
Dr. Melnick, from IHAN, as well as our faculty member. I don't need to name all your names. Anyway, we're really thrilled to be doing this, and I feel like this is a new beginning, having a conference like this. It's a historic event, and I have a feeling we're going to be doing it more often. But welcome, everybody.
I'd also like to introduce Professor Elaine Congress, who very kindly gave us some of her youngsters as speakers today. So Elaine, would you like to say a few words also?
Okay, right, thank you. Well, good evening to some of us here in New York, and good morning to you, in Australia. I'm Elaine Congress. I'm Associate Dean and Professor at Fordham University Graduate School of Social Service. And also, I'm co-chair of our Institute for Women and Girls. And I've been, really one of the founders of our institute. And one of our big focuses have been international issues for women. And I've been involved really for about 20 years, and we've always tried to do something on the Saturday between the 2 weeks of the Commission on Status of Women when they meet in March in New York at the United Nations. Well, we were planning for, and I think the original day for our conference was March 14th, and you know what happened with COVID. And the 19th, I mean, we were canceled. But, every challenge brings a new opportunity. So I was really pleased that, and of course, we're continuing our connection with International Health Awareness Network with Sarosh, which we've worked with for many years, and also with Dr. Gabriella Casper, and I really want to have mention Dr. Casper, because she's really took it upon herself. She said, okay, well, let's try to do the whole thing online. And she's really been able to do this. And this is a terrific conference. It was very interesting. It's very complex. We have a lot of speakers, a lot of moving parts, but I mean, it's wonderful in terms of putting it all together. I also just want to say a little bit about my work at the United Nations. I represent 2 NGOs at the United Nations, the International Federation of Social Workers. We're in 120 countries around the world. And I also represent the Institute for Multicultural Counseling and Education Services. And one of the big things that I do at the UN is that I run a group of students. We have Fordham students, usually 6 or 7 students that I work with. And I really want to mention especially 2 of our students who are now graduates, class of 2020, and Anna Peverly and Liz Manis, who will be speaking today. So I think you all want to kind of get started with the conference, but I just want to say it should be very interesting and exciting. And I'm particularly interested in hearing all of the students, our Fordham students, but also all of your medical students, because this is really what our future will be. This is what, who will really help us realize, the goals of SDG 5, gender equality, as we move forth in the world in the years ahead.
Thank you very much. We have a very packed program with many short and sharp talks. It'll be my first experience of speed dating. Only the topic of conversation will be not self-centered people trying to impress me. However, it'll be speed dating, and it'll basically focus on our particular field of interest in the world of gender inequality and appeals we all seem to have different areas of interest. So please let me set the scene. This event was to be held at the Commission on the Status of Women. So whilst gender inequality is a very broad topic, we are limiting our discussion today to women's inequality. I feel quite happy doing it because this meeting was meant to be held at the Commission on the Status. So first of all, the speakers for the next segment, Iris, Ari, Sarash, Liz, Lauren, Jordan, Maria, Vijay, and Fatima. Could you all just quickly say the word hello, and that'll bring your faces to the front of the screen so everyone can see you.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you. And can you now mute? And we'd like to hear what you all have to say.
May the peace and the blessings of the Holy Ones pour forth over the world and rest upon us, protecting, purifying, energizing, and strengthening us. There is a peace that passes understanding and a power that makes all things new. May the rhythm of that peace vibrate in our hearts and the creative power resound in our lives, awakening, transmuting, and giving birth to that which ought to be. May our consciousness become ever more at one, our many lights, one light. May the light and the love and the power of the one life pour through all of us throughout the world and attract all good. So be it, and help us to do our part.
Hi, my name is Huri Gadelekian. I am the chair of NGO Committee on the Status of Women. NGO CSW, as we are known, is a coalition of nonprofit organizations globally who fight for gender equality. Our mandate is to really convene these organizations and guests who are really fighting for gender equality once a year during the Commission on the Status of Women. That happens every March, where 193 countries get together and discuss a specific topic on gender equality, on what is missing and what they need to help. We've actually been doing this for over 45 years, and it is really important that we help bring voices of women and girls to the United Nations, where it is heard globally. So for the last 25 years, we've been really working on this document called the Beijing Platform for Action, a meeting that happened 25 years ago in Beijing, and 187 countries came up with the most amazing document that civil society actually brought to their countries and really did amazing work for achieving gender equality. But in the last few years, we've been seeing some pushback. So along with UN Women, France, and Mexico, NGO CSW is committed to now galvanizing, mobilizing voices in order to address what we're calling the Generation Equality Forums. You can actually, there's a website you can check, we'll share with you, and also go to our website, ngocsw.org, to learn more about this campaign. I think it's really important that voices are heard and that we keep fighting against the pushback that we're seeing in so many countries right now. Without civil society, we really can't achieve what countries or governments nationally or even locally promise. So we need to really hold our governments accountable, and we need to help them with implementation of the promises made. So I hope, and I thank you all for inviting me to your meeting, and I hope you will take the time to go to our website and to learn more about us, follow us on social media, and come and join us on all the virtual meetings. Even after cancellation of our forums, we're actually bringing all of our voices to virtual gatherings just like this one. So nothing's going to stop us. Thank you.
Greetings. In my nearly 80 years of life, this is the first time that I am witnessing a moment of collective crises and opportunity. The world is united in facing what started as a public health challenge, but has now become an economic, political, and social justice crisis. In every country, we have discovered unsung heroes. As a retired obstetrician and gynecologist, I am very proud of the heroism of doctors, nurses, and support staff at hospitals. Our eyes have also opened to the other unsung heroes who have never been properly appreciated: sanitation, transport, food, and delivery workers. So, even from this terrible darkness, there has also been light, love, hope, and heroism. Now in the United States, we are facing another challenge: the persistent discrimination of African Americans, which has reignited the Black Lives Matter movement. Again, from despair, we are finding hope in solidarity and collective action, because we know that injustice for one is injustice for all. I was born in Iran, in a country and at a time when life was even harder for women than it is today. My devoted and demanding mother wanted to ensure that I would have the freedom and opportunities that she did not have. When I arrived in America as a female surgeon in the 1970s, I was also a minority. I was a Muslim with an unusual name. And whenever I was invited someplace as Dr. Roshan, they were expecting a man, not a woman. I had to struggle to find my way, to avoid the inappropriate behavior of my male colleagues, since we did not have the Me Too movement back then. Even as a doctor, I had to move from one unfair, underpaid job to another until I found the courage to follow my father's advice to be my own boss. And when I was still a young professional, just starting my practice in my 30s, I joined New Jersey Women's Medical Association. Then in 1985, I attended the United Nations Conference on Women in Nairobi, Kenya. That conference was a turning point in my life. I was asked by a Kenyan woman who was the community leader of her village whether I could help her. She wanted me to be her community's connection to the West. I partnered with my friend Sybil Shainwolf, and together we founded the International Health Awareness Network, now called IHAN. There we were two friends, starting something from nothing. At that time, I did not know what we were starting and where the journey would take us. Well, in these 35 years, we have partnered with many NGOs and local communities. Equally important, We made new friends, many of whom are on this call, who have supported and partnered with IHAN for decades. We stand on the shoulders of our mothers and their generation who had to overcome unimaginable challenges as women. My generation has done our best to make it easier and better for you. But clearly, our work is not done. I pass the torch to all of you.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Broderick. I'm the UN Special Rapporteur on Women's Rights across the world. I also hold a number of other roles, including as an adjunct professor at the University of Sydney, as a senior advisor to McKinsey, and as the founder and convener of the Male Champions of Change strategy. It's an absolute delight to be with you today to talk about the global perspective on gender equality. And I know many of us would have been meeting in New York just a couple of months ago to really celebrate 25 years after the Beijing Platform for Action, and also to talk about where to from here. So I'm so sorry that we weren't able to get together in person, but I really applaud you for coming together as a part of a CSW, but in a virtual event. Today, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking to you about where we're at on gender equality, particularly globally, and why we need action now. So you will know that the Beijing Platform for Action was a result of the 4th Women's World Conference. So thousands of women came together in Beijing 25 years ago to actually advocate for change. And they lobbied their governments. And 1995, when the Beijing Platform for Action was developed, was actually the high point for women's rights. So what's happened in those last 25 years? We have made progress in some areas. We've made strong progress on maternal mortality. We have more young women in education than ever before. We've had a doubling of a number of elected parliamentarians who are female in the parliaments across the world. And the other thing, and the great shining area, is young women's activism on gender equality and also cross-movement building with the climate change movement and other movements. So there's been some good progress. But I have to say that there are one thing that became totally visible in the research for the CSW this year is that we have such a long way to go. And the situation now is that COVID has actually come along, and in many ways it is actually more deeply entrenched the inequality that exists for women and girls. So let me just spend a couple of minutes talking about COVID. I mean, COVID-19 is first and foremost a humanitarian crisis, but it does have differential impacts on men and women. And what we know is that while more men are actually dying from the disease, there are still other gendered impacts. So, for example, if I look at the issue of domestic and family violence, we know from different countries across the world, including our own, that there has been an increase in the incidence of domestic and family violence. That comes about as a result of quarantine strategies, of a result of lockdown, and for so many women across the world where home is not a safe place. If we look at the data coming out of Hubei province, they've had a 300% uplift in domestic violence. Similarly in Italy and other nations of the world. So that's been one gendered impact. Another is the unequal care burden, which sits in many countries of the world. In fact, I'd say all countries of the world. It's sitting firmly on women. And when children are out of child's care, when kids are out of school, when we're seeing an increased need to care for our elderly because they are more vulnerable, and indeed when everyone's at home, the burden of unpaid work is increasing. And that burden is falling disproportionately on women across the world. The third thing I say is they're describing this second crisis, the economic crisis that's accompanying COVID, as the she-cession. They're saying never before has a crisis like this impacted so many women economically. And we know that women are disproportionately impacted because some of the sectors that are impacted, such as travel, such as retail, such as hospitality, many of those sectors are feminised industries. So we're seeing more and more women in precarious work or actually dropping out of the labour market entirely. And then finally, one of the other impacts is that in the recovery and rebuilding strategies, we're seeing an absence of women's voices. Pretty much in every national COVID response recovery team across the world, we're seeing a very low number of women actually doing the planning and involved in rebuilding what comes next. But I don't want to leave you with all the challenges. What I do want to say to you is that I'm seeing some incredible opportunities as well. I'm just to give you a couple of examples of that. I'm seeing some really strong advocates, both men and women, and particularly also in the private sector, stepping up and talking and to particularly their employees and their male employees about how care and unpaid work can be better shared in the home. I know of a number of male champions of change who've actually run men's only Zoom calls to share strategies about how they're ensuring that the work that's at home is being shared equally with their partners. The other thing that we've seen is we've seen a wholesale shift from working in an office to working from home. And here I'm talking about knowledge workers. And what we're seeing with that is that a shift that would have taken years and has been taken years in many companies has happened over a weekend. So if you look at Telstra, they moved 25,000 employees from working in an office on the Friday to working from home on the Monday. And as some people have said, you know, it makes you wonder why we couldn't have done that before. The fact is, one of the barriers that we've actually identified, or two barriers, are habit and inertia. So I'm not saying that working from home is going to suit everyone, but where we're at now is hopefully a mindset where we can have greater levels of flexibility, that people can be present in the office when they want to and when they need to be, but also they can work from anywhere else in the world when that works for the employer and also the employee. Of course, often health workers need to be physically present, although of course telemedicine and all those other things have really received a boost. And I think what I've heard from most of the CEOs that I'm dealing with is this is a moment of opportunity. We need to ask ourselves, what type of world will we inhabit post-pandemic? Are we happy to inhabit a world where inequality, and particularly gender inequality, is more entrenched? Or are we going to do something different? And if we decide to do something different, we need to start taking those decisions now. Those decisions which are going to result in a much fairer, a much more equal, and particularly a much more gender equal world. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me today to discuss the impacts of COVID-19 on women and girls, some of the issues UNICEF remains concerned about as countries start to reopen, and the solutions that women and girls are asking us to take forward, to take to scale with our partners like you. Thanks for your attention and for listening. I'm Lauren Rumble. I head UNICEF's Gender Equality Portfolio, working with teams in over 190 country offices, with over 19,000 staff, interns and consultants, determined to translate gender equality principles into our programs and into our workspaces. Even before COVID-19 struck, we knew that there was a disproportionate amount of care carried by women and girls. Women form the bulk of the health frontline worker service, seldom paid or recognized for their work. Training opportunities are few, and they really suffer from a lack of employee protections such as medical insurance or childcare for their own families, despite their life-saving work. These patterns start early on in childhood, with girls doing double the amount of household chores than their male siblings. This compromises their learning and play opportunities. We know from our data released in March, together with Plan and UN Women, that girls' education starts to become a crisis the minute they hit adolescence. Much more at risk of violence, discrimination and abuse, and child marriage. Girls are failing to complete secondary school and transition successfully to work. Even if they do make it into the workplace, they're more likely to suffer from unequal pay, discrimination and harassment. Violence is a real problem for women and girls, especially by those closest to him. Before the crisis, we knew that 1 in 3 girls was at risk of violence by a partner, with little access to justice, medical or psychosocial services. Programs in all 3 areas, tackling social norms, addressing gender-based violence where it starts, and really working with communities to support paid, well-recognized jobs for women, is long underfunded and unrecognized as necessary work by governments and by other sectors. Now, as countries start to reopen and governments design meaningful response and recovery strategies, we must put women and girls at the heart. How can we do that? We have 3 key recommendations. The first is to address this crisis of care and protect the caregiver. That means gender-responsive social protection, like unconditional cash grants, directly into the hands of women and girls. We know that they will make wise choices about how to use that money in their own families to meet basic needs and reinvesting in their local economies, helping to stimulate growth and recovery. We also need to prevent gender-based violence before it even starts. That means addressing harmful norms and working with parents and community leaders to talk about women's rights, girls' rights. We need to make sure that services are accessible for survivors and really centered on their needs. We're working in refugee camps in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Bangladesh, to make sure that survivor-centered services are available in virtual safe spaces for those who can't come in person, as well as in-person clinics and support centers. We're also using technology to create platforms for engagement and discussion with young people. We've just launched a new app in Southeast Asia, which is also going to be launched in Kenya, to really provide information to young women and girls about menstruation, about their own reproductive health, and where they can access more information. Thirdly, we want to see greater investments in opening up schools for the better for girls, especially focused on the most marginalized and disadvantaged. That means addressing the digital divide. We need to connect schools in the most rural and remote communities with the internet so that girls can learn offline and online in the times that suit them best. We need to train teachers and guides on how to identify signs of abuse and where to refer them. We need to tackle those prejudices and bias in our learning materials so that we can really create a new generation of learners and entrepreneurs. And finally, we need to really fund women and girls organizations. They are the front line of services and they know what works best for them. UNICEF has joined civil society and foundational groups to support the first ever Girls Resilience Fund, providing small-time grants to adolescent girls' movements and collectives, helping them get the help and care they need when and where they need it. Girls know best what works for them, and we have to stand back and stand aside to help them have their voices heard. We need to trust in them and make sure that all our response efforts create a new and more empowering future for everybody. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Jordan Williams, Director of Global Policy and Advocacy for the International Health Awareness Network. I would like to thank Dr. Casper for inviting me to share a bit about my experience over the past few years as youth representative to the United Nations and some of the things that I have learned about the role of research and mentorship and charting out a path towards a just and equitable global society. I arrived in New York in 2017 to begin my graduate studies, having just completed a few years' service back home in Texas with the Refugee Resettlement Agency supporting unaccompanied minors seeking humanitarian protection at the border. Within a few weeks of starting classes, I met Dr. IHAN at a conference on migration. I was moved not only by the wisdom shared by the guests IHAN brought to highlight the urgent health needs of this population, but also by their determination to effect change on the ground. I'm grateful to say that long after that meeting, Dr. IHAN brought me on board and set us out to work. For the sake of time, I'd like to highlight just a few of our more recent policy projects and some thoughts on how we, in particular we, the next generation of scholars, mental and physical health care providers, educators, lawyers, business professionals, and everything in between, can actively champion change. During that first year, IHAN was invited to draft a statement for NGO CSW. This statement was synthesized from research and deliberations launched by the Zero Draft team, who'd conducted a thorough review of the literature and agreed language on the topic of that year's Commission on the Status of Women, in order to present a concrete set of recommendations for future action. These recommendations were well received, and in the years going forward, we set a successful formula for analyzing future CSW themes by cross-referencing a number of domains against a number of underserved populations, which you see color-coded below. The preamble from our 2019 statement is also displayed here, calling for increased collaboration in protecting and promoting the human rights of all women and girls in all contexts. Here is an excerpt from a compendium built by Dr. Marciana Popescu, a dear friend of IHAN through Fordham University, and myself, on behalf of the NGO Committee on Migration. This document was grounded in a previously published set of recommendations called the 10 Acts, which outlined a series of objectives for safe, orderly, and regular migration. These were published by civil society, however, member states ultimately incorporated them into the Global Compact on Migration. Drawing from the expertise of colleagues around the world, this compendium contained concrete examples of how civil society had successfully implemented each of the aforementioned objectives, alongside guidelines for bringing these practices up to scale. The final text was welcomed at the adoption of the Global Compacts in Marrakesh, Morocco in 2018. I have also had the honor of serving as Vice Chair of the Working Group on Girls at the UN. With the devotion of an exceptional team of graduate students and their mentors, this coalition was able to produce an updated set of fact sheets on the human rights of the girl child. As an example, I have displayed a portion of our piece on the rape of the girl child, including relevant statistics, preventative practices, and links to relevant UN and scholarly publications. These fact sheets have become an essential tool for grounding our discussions in evidence when meeting with UN missions or conducting other advocacy initiatives. The full set of resources has been published at girlsrights.org. This past year, in preparation for the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, our NGO CSW team has conducted a thorough review of not only the human rights legislation from 1995, but of all interconnected international agreements, several of which you see listed here. Our methodology for this endeavor was somewhat more straightforward than in previous years, focusing on the 3 M's: mandates, what should have been happening on the ground over the last 25 years, metrics, how are we measuring our progress towards these objectives, and how are we determining compliance, and then missing what issues have come about in the next 25 years, what things still need to be added to the books, and then again, as always, what actions and best practices can civil society bring forth and recommend. For the sake of time, I will not dive too deeply into our findings, but it is sufficient to say that our generation owes much gratitude to our mothers and grandmothers before us. At least on paper, we as a human family are all in consensus about what our world ought to look like. And while there are certainly still areas of the agreed language that must be strengthened and updated in order to better protect the most marginalized, our generation has the luxury of devoting ourselves to the next steps: action and accountability. One of the benefits of working in coalition, as these examples have shown, is the wealth of knowledge in the room, knowledge in terms of depth, diversity, and lived experience. As our world becomes ever more reliant upon technology, especially under the uncertainty of COVID-19, it is essential that we continue to leverage these tools in ways that allow us to learn from voices that too often go unheard, including but not limited to those of our girls and youth, those of widows, child brides, persons of religious, ethnic, and cultural minorities, survivors of all forms of violence, those living with disability, and those who have been displaced. I will close simply by sharing how excited I am to hear from our students and learn how the knowledge they are generating can inform our practices at both the grassroots and global levels. Thank you so very much.
Everyone, my name is Maria Mensen. I am president and co-founder of Mensen Academy in the Dominican Republic. I have been working and collaborating with the International Health Awareness Network, IHAN, since 2003, while I was a student and a journalist working in New York City.
Today, I am here to share with you some of the work we do to further IHAN's mission of empowering women through education. Mensen Academy was founded in late 2009 in the rural mountains of the central North Coast. It is a collaborative family effort where our main initiative focuses on the quality of education delivered rather than in the quantity of people we serve. Though the program started as an informal English or art session delivered in my kitchen, the program has evolved to include kindergarten and preschool grades all the way to 5th grade, recognized by the Ministry of Education in Dominican Republic. We have enrolled more than 250 children and young adults in our programs since we opened our doors. Around 90% of them are still in the education system, since most of them are still very young, and more than 70% have been girls. Though our rotation rates suffer every year due to economical community aspects and the ever-changing tourism industry, it is easy to see that our impact in the community continues to show growth and permanent positive signs. Some of the girls who started the program with us when they were between the ages of 10 to 14 have continued to further their education and are now proud university graduates. Candidates to receive degrees in the upcoming years in accounting, veterinary medicine, education, physical education, and business administration. Or they have successfully enrolled in the Naval Academy, become recognized national athletes, and have integrated gracefully to the workforce of the nation in the fields of tourism and hospitality. Our younger students are often recognized regionally or even nationally for their excellence in mathematics, literature, or science levels. And one of the most prestigious high schools in the country, Liceo Científico, looks to recruit our students to their center every year. Our programs continue to grow, and with them, we aim to reach equality through education in the near future.
Why gender equality remains elusive. Women constitute half of the world's population. More than half the nations of the world call themselves democracies, but no nation has achieved gender equality. Speaking at the UN Conference on Women in 1995, Gro Brundtland noted, "There isn't a single country in the world, not one, where men and women enjoy equal opportunities. In spite of small progress, this remains true today. Some of the key factors contributing to women's inequality are mortality inequality. Left to nature, there should be more women than men in a population. But some countries report fewer women than men in their population. This is due to the unnaturally high mortality rates of women, which points to practices of severe gender bias. For example, countries where there is strong preference for boys over girls, female feticide and infanticides are still prevalent. Nurture and healthcare. Globally, girls are 3 times more likely to be malnourished than boys. Malnourished girls grow up to become malnourished women. Women's well-being is key to healthy families, indeed healthy societies. Access to education. For a number of reasons, most children not in school are girls. In some places, girls between the ages of 10 and 17 are often forced to marry. This disrupts their education and limits their lifetime opportunities. Special opportunity inequality. Gender bias occurs in specialized areas of higher education and training, such as in science, technology, and engineering. Not uncommon even in many developed countries. Professional inequality. Gender bias is prevalent in the higher echelons of universities, corporations, government, judiciary, and international bodies. Coupled with that is the entrenched pay gap and the recently identified Me Too issue that points to widespread sexual harassment of women in every rank. Ownership inequality. Property and assets inherited on the basis of patriarchal traditions and laws results in women's chronic economic dependency. Laws also constrain women's ability to secure bank loans and other resources, limiting women's autonomy and entrepreneurship. Inadequate role in public policy decisions. Worldwide, women have very little voice in public policy decision making at the local, national, or international level. Fewer women are in the parliament, the Congress, or in leadership positions as compared to the total population. Nobel laureate Amartya Sen noted, "Nothing, arguably, is as important today as an adequate recognition of political, economic, and social participation and leadership of women. This is indeed a crucial aspect of development as freedom. We must achieve that development by not letting freedom and equality remain elusive." Thank you.
I hear you very clearly, and we're asking you to speak about Bangladesh's experience and women's empowerment and advancement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Casper, and I'm delighted to join this inspiring group of committed and accomplished women. It actually takes me back to the heady days leading up to Beijing. And I'm also very happy to wish Dr. Roshan a very big happy birthday. She has always been an inspiration to many of us. I see the list of speakers, and I do realize that I'm possibly the only amateur here. I'm not a health professional or expert. I will only be able to share with you the experience of my country in taking forward the women's agenda. Dear colleagues, dear friends, 2020 was supposed to be an auspicious year for advancing gender equality. It marks the 25th anniversary of the adoption of Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action. And the 64th session which was scheduled in March, where many of us were there, was much awaited to celebrate and take stock of Beijing achievements. Unfortunately, CSW ended up being the first casualty of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the session had to be cut short into a mere formality. But I'm glad that we did not accept that setback and do nothing. And here we are. And I think today's event is a right step in that direction to do something. Dear friends, let me share I have a longish statement, but let me share very briefly what the experience of my country. Bangladesh is a relatively young country, yet our achievements in gender equality and women's empowerment has been way better than most of our contemporaries with similar socioeconomic backgrounds. According to the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Report of 2020, Bangladesh leads in South Asia when it comes to women's advancement and empowerment, ranked 50th among 153 countries and 7th when it comes to political empowerment. And one may ask, how did this come about? And I would say it starts with our constitution. Our constitution clearly stipulates equality of men and women in all spheres. And from the very beginning, Bangladesh has promoted women's equal participation in public life, introduced affirmative actions to integrate women in politics and economic activities. And over the past decade and a half, I would say, there have been transformational changes which have resulted in narrowing the gender gap further in our national life in all spheres. And one of the main factors I would say is that our achievements on women's empowerment is the result of strong political commitment and innovative policy interventions. Bangladesh is perhaps the only country in the world now where we have had elected women prime ministers without a break since 1991. At present, we not only have a women prime minister, but the speaker of the national parliament, the leader of the opposition, and the deputy leader of the parliament are all women. Having women in leadership positions was instrumental in bringing about real change and in adopting bold policies to integrate women's participation in all spheres of national life. And mind you, we are a traditional society and a developing country. And I believe the second other instrumental factor was our heavy investment in women's and girls' education. And I think that opened up new opportunities for them. In fact, participation of girls in the primary education is now higher than boys. Women's participation in workforce has also significantly increased, and we believe that with women's economic empowerment, their status in their families and communities are also improving. They certainly have more say about their lives. There are studies to show, and this might be of some interest to you, that Bangladesh's success in bringing down the high population growth rate was a direct outcome of women's education and women's economic empowerment. We have also found that with education, discriminatory customary and social practices such as early and child marriage could also be significantly brought down. Literate and working women certainly had better bargaining power in family matters and about matters related to her life, from when she will marry to how many children she wants to have. And to strengthen these policy measures, enabling legal measures and laws have also been adopted, although I do admit that challenges remain. Women's empowerment can often be negated by violence against women and girls. Early marriages, domestic violence, etc., certainly stand in the way of the realization of women's full potentials. Efforts are made at every level to raise awareness about such social ills and to ensure the effective application of the laws and policies that are in place. And in this respect, I wish to recognize the important role played by women's organizations, CSOs, and NGOs in Bangladesh in protecting and promoting the rights of women, and they play a very important supportive role to the efforts of the government. Now, let me very briefly touch upon the devastating impact of COVID-19 that may have on all our gains made so far, and I know previous speakers have touched on that. Globally, this pandemic has resulted in increasing incidences of violence against women. We have heard about that. And at a societal level, this pandemic has raised the risks for women due to their traditional roles as caregivers. For example, in Bangladesh, the health system is dominated by women. More than 94% of our nurses and over 90% of the community health workers are women. And they are now vulnerable to infections and risks to their lives. And COVID-19 is also seriously impacting on women's livelihood. Over 90% of women in Bangladesh are employed in the informal sector, and many are now losing their jobs with no protection. And same is the plight of the thousands of women migrants workers from Bangladesh who had helped to bring transformational changes to the lives of their families and children, as many have lost their jobs and are facing the prospect of being returned home. Even in the formal sector, massive job losses confront women now. And I will very quickly try to round up this sort of close up there. The closure of schools also, I believe our other speakers have said, referred to this. The closure of schools, colleges, and other educational institutions are also going to impact the achievement made in girls' education in Bangladesh, especially in the rural area. The government has taken a range of initiatives to reduce and mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on women, especially on women-headed households, women-led businesses, small and medium industries to recover from the losses. But it is very clear that we need collective and dedicated efforts to tackle the negative impacts of COVID-19 at the national level, but also to have it very much integrated in the global agenda for gender equality. We must continue to raise our voices about the women's vulnerabilities and special needs during this pandemic and integrate them in the responses. And it's also very important to engage and empower women in tackling the pandemic and its socioeconomic, political, and cultural impacts in all situations. Bangladesh will continue to work on this front, especially in the UN. In April, we joined the UN Secretary General's appeal on gender-based violence and COVID-19. And as one of the delegations, which was always at the forefront when it came to women, I mean, I personally, I was in the Beijing conference. I was involved also in the adoption of the WPS resolution as part of my delegation in the Security Council then. Our commitment to women's empowerment and gender equality is total, and our efforts in this regard will continue until we reach our goal. Again, my apologies for this very longish statement, and but it's great to be here, and I wish you all the best, and I look forward to listening to the remaining part of.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Can you wave if you can? Perfect. Thank you so much for the talks. They were all fantastic. The first question I have is for Ambassador Fatima. So what do you like most about your job?
What do I like most about my job? Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Coming from a developing country, coming from a country where women were traditionally, it was felt that we have to be at home. But I believe, like Dr. Roshan, I also had very supportive parents who pushed me to, break the frontiers. I like my job because I think it gives me an opportunity to really make a difference. Starting from when I was a young delegate, I remember I was serving here and part of the delegation which went to Beijing. When I was negotiating, a part of the, member of the third committee negotiating the optional protocol to CEDAW. So to be able to actually make a difference, I mean, on matters, policy matters, on something that I believe in, but then I can also push it. I think that's something certainly that inspires me to continue to work in this area. My first assignment was to New York many years back. That's when I first met Dr. Roshan, and here I'm back again. So it's good. I mean, even in this situation, I can give you an example. It was great when we could join the Secretary General's call for against gender violence. And then, for instance, myself and some other ambassadors, we were able to actually have a very good joint statement on the plights of migrants in COVID-19 situation. So yes, we can, in our own humble way, in our own small way, we try to make a difference on policy issues that not only impact on globally, but also can have a much more significant impact at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. The second question I have is, are there any major life events that have led you to where you are now, or that you can remember?
Can you say that question again?
Yep. So the second question I have is there any specific or major life event that had led you to where you are now as the ambassador?
Sorry, any major?
Life events or a point in your life that had led you to where you are now?
He's really asking you what inspired you. Why would you want to be the ambassador?
I don't know. I'm possibly one of those few. I'm a career diplomat. So I started as a third secretary, as a second secretary, and now I'm possibly come to the fag end of my career. But I don't know, I'm possibly one of those few fortunate ones who was able to, pursue an education, a degree, which was on international relations, but then also end up being able to pursue a profession dealing with that. And to be very honest, I remember the first few days when I entered the Foreign Service, there were only 4 women before me in the entire service. So I had to struggle. But then I would say that, I had very supportive colleagues and especially a very supportive family. And there was no looking back. I think I liked doing what I was doing. And possibly the very fact that, one of my first assignments was to New York. And being able to, again, see that, this small me being able to actually represent my country and be able to make a difference. I don't know. I mean, no looking back for me. I love my job.
Great, thank you. So I've had a couple of questions come through now for Ms. Huri Kudakian. Can you hear me? If you could unmute.
Yes, absolutely. Hi.
Perfect. So this one's from myself. I had, my bags all packed, ready to go for CSW this year, along with 18 other medical students. Of course, we're all terribly disappointed. Do you think that there will be a postponed CW will go ahead later on in the year, or is it more likely to be virtual next year in 2021?
Well, I don't think there's anybody more disappointed than me and the 50 volunteers that worked 6 months to prepare to welcome you all. This has been obviously a huge disappointment for all of us. But just like Professor Gabrielle said and Soros said, we are actually looking at this as a pivotal moment to look at our work and achievement of gender equality from a new lens, right? Because it feels like every time we advance, something pushes us back, and COVID-19 this time is what really is trying to push us back. At the same time, it also has opened up our eyes to say there's got to be different ways of doing things. I don't think CSW 64 is done. I mean, the agreements were already negotiated, and on that first day, that Monday, we all were there for half a day, people who were in New York City, and the Bureau actually accepted the negotiate. It wasn't a negotiated outcome, it was a statement. We are looking forward to CSW 65. We are determined to not only schedule and convene for CSW 65, we are determined to bring Beijing plus 25 in CSW 65. We are not going to forget all that we organized to celebrate, to push for, and to demand agreements that were made 25 years ago. And that was the biggest deal about this past year. It was really to talk to member states and say, you all, your predecessors, agreed on a document. And that's the one thing that UN should really be proud of, that a global convening can happen and governments, all governments in the world can agree on something. And they agreed on the Beijing Platform for Action Points. So we will bring Beijing plus 25. I know a young member of our group actually said Beijing plus 25 plus 1. We might just add a plus 1 to all the logos that we're doing just to make sure that it's there. I do think, I mean, again, it's hard for me to predict from now what's going on next year. We're all in the same boat on that one. We don't know if there's a second wave of COVID. We don't know if it's going to be worse, better, or we don't know if we're going to find vaccine that fast. Without vaccine, I wouldn't expect anybody to convene in such large numbers. I don't recommend it. And I also want to say, especially with climate, this working in place really showed us how, like the carbon footprint that we've been creating is something that we need to look at ourselves, because we are human rights activists and we want equality for all. We really need to think about how we affect globally, especially in climate, when we try to gather all the time. So I'm so pleased that you all are adopting this online possibility of meetings as well, because one of the ways that we will meet for CSW 65 is also virtual. I hope that it's half virtual, half in person. So some people who can afford to fly, or because that's another thing we're concerned about. Economically, I think there's a hardship on all organizations because of COVID and the global economic hardship. But we're also looking at how we can organize possibly not 500, maybe more parallel events, because this past year we had actually scheduled 550 panel discussions. Even when I think about it, I'm like, what were we thinking? I hope that answered your question. I went about it a little bit twisted.
No, it definitely did. Thank you so much. There is one more question I have. So I've seen some online information about UN Women and Generation Equality Forum. Can you tell me what is the Generation Equality Forum and has all the work relating to this stopped?
Not at all. And thank you so much for asking that, because that's one of the projects that we're most excited about. So NGO CSW is mandated to convene for CSW, as I said in my video. We also do monthly meetings. Our final monthly meeting of the season actually just happened yesterday, and we take the summer off usually. We don't really convene over the summer. And then in September, we hit the ground running, planning for the next CSW, right? But a few years ago, you know, I don't know, I know some people on this, and I recognize some of our, hi Beatrice, hi Elaine, some of our members that come and note that there's always been this need to have a fifth Women's World Conference, right? And it just was not the right time and political will to have one. Because as most of you know, as much as we've advanced over the last 25 years, many countries, including unfortunately mine, the United States, has pushed back on gender equality and reproductive rights. So if we tried to have a fifth Women's World Conference, which would be amazing and fantastic for all of us, we were afraid that there were too many governments that were going to take some of our rights back. So instead of trying to keep meeting in that UN umbrella, UN Women decided that they wanted to create a momentum for accelerated progress for gender equality. And that's where Generation Equality Forum idea came about. They partnered with two countries, one global north, one global south, France and Mexico, excuse me. It's been a long week of too much talking, excuse me. And they launched it, and actually our consultation day was going to be a huge launch at Apollo Theater, where they were going to talk about the steps they're taking forward, and the global meetings that were going to take place in Mexico in May and Paris in July. All of those are postponed right now, and we don't even know if they're going to meet, both in both countries or one of the countries. Everything is up in the air. But what's wonderful about this Generation Equality Forum campaign is what I call is that it's ongoing. And I really urge all of you, especially the younger generation, and that's why we're calling it Generation Equality Forums, because we want the next generation to take on what we have achieved and come up with better creative ways of bringing our rights forward. Jordan Williams actually is on the CSW executive committee, and somebody I look up to as a young intellectual, is a perfect example of how she's taken her education and her life experiences to put into bringing more of equality in our work. So we will be convening consultations online. So most of Generation Equality campaign is online, and you can find more about it. I don't want to take up too much time on a website that I can share here, or I'm sure Professor Gabrielle will share with all of you.
Great, thank you so much for that.
And happy birthday, Saraj!
Happy birthday. So we have some more questions come in. The next is for Liz Broderick. Are you able to unmute and give me a wave?
Yep.
Thank you. So the first question is, are you able to tell us a little bit about the UN Working Group on Women and Girls? And what
Thanks very much, Jessica, and thanks Gabrielle and Sarosh and everyone for organising such an interesting event, particularly as part of the CSW. It might be worth just understanding a little bit about the UN Working Group for Women and Girls, because across the UN, as you will all know, there are many different parts. So the UN with a focus on development, security and human rights. Most of the human rights parts of the UN, of course, are based in Geneva, and that's really where I was to be based this year. I'm now stuck down here in Sydney, but in the Geneva part of the UN, which works with the Human Rights Council. So the Human Rights Council is supposed to be sitting this week. It has, interestingly, and you've got to love the UN, just in the last couple of days, cancelled any in-person meeting, and the Human Rights Council will now be sitting electronically, essentially, virtually. You may be aware of the urgent debate that happened yesterday on racism in the US. It's the first time the Human Rights Council has ever held an urgent debate, and particularly at such short notice. And if you're interested, you can follow those links. But just coming back to the human rights part of the UN, there are pretty much three mechanisms for women and girls' rights. One is the CEDAW treaty body, so the treaty body for the Convention on All Forms of Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and Girls. The second mandate is a special rapporteur on violence against women, Dubrovka, who's from Croatia. And the third mandate is our mandate. We're a group of 5 special rapporteurs. We come from each regions of the world, so from the 5 regions of the world, and we form what's called the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. So we have a mandate to progress all forms of equality for women and girls across the world. And we have a couple of levers that we can pull to achieve that mandate. One is we issue official communications to the heads of nation states. So just to give you an example of that, where we become aware of a human rights violation, and for example, in Saudi Arabia at the minute, those young women human rights defenders who are incarcerated and being tortured despite for their advocacy on, giving women the right to drive, women the right to vote. We're routinely in contact with the head of Saudi Arabia, demanding their release and bringing new information to their attention. And just 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago now, we issued a communication to a South Asian country because, and it was coming back to the Ambassador Fatma's comments about how many women are employed in the informal economy at the minute. So these women were women who were street vendors. They were selling their clothes in the public space. When the lockdown came, they had to move from the public space, and they decided to become digital entrepreneurs and sell their clothes from their Facebook pages. When they started to do that, and they were modeling their clothes and showing what they looked like, the Prime Minister of that particular nation came out the next day and said, there are young women who are damaging the morality of our nation, and the police will be going over. So the police went over, pulled these women out of their houses, and then they were forced to read Facebook confessions, apologising for modelling their clothes on Facebook, and they're now currently incarcerated. So that's the type of official communication that we issue. We ask the government for explanation. We point out to them that they've signed international conventions, and that at first blush they seem to be in breach of those conventions, and we ask for the immediate release of individuals. And we're doing that with women all across the world every single day. So that's our first thing. The second thing we do is we undertake country visits. So we visit a country for a 2-week period, and we assess the status of women and girls. We do a lot of research on that particular country. We talk, then we go in there and we connect widely with one from the Prime Minister, President, most senior government ministers, to the private sector, all the way through to the human rights activists. And we make preliminary observations in the same way that CEDAW might, but we make them in country rather than sitting in Geneva. And then we table our reports in the Human Rights Council. And just on early next week, I will table our report into Greece.
looking at the status of women and girls in Greece, including in the refugee camps on the Greek islands, in camps like Moria camp, a camp which was built for 1,500 but which now has 20,000 people, and an outbreak of COVID in that camp. So that's the second thing we do. And just the third thing is every year we will do a strong thematic report. And this year we've completed a global report where we consulted in every region of the world on women's rights in the changing world of work. What would work look like if we put women's rights front and centre? And we were interested in that, not just for women, because what we know is when we put women's rights front and centre, everyone lifts. Economies lift, men lift, families lift. So we'll be submitting our report and tabling it in the 44th session of the Human Rights Council just next week. So what my message to you around the UN Working Group is, unlike CEDAW, you don't have to have exhausted every domestic remedy prior to bringing a complaint to the UN Working Group on Women and Girls. So every night we're getting notifications from all over the world, and I would urge you, as particularly each of you who are engaged in CSO, civil society organisations, to consider the working group as a potential to take the concerns about human rights violations against women and girls happening on the ground. Our working group can take violations directly to the attention of the leaders of those nations and ask for explanations. Now, sometimes that's useful. It's useful for you in your advocacy or not. Sometimes it can be problematic, depending on the timing and the political situation. But I would urge you to just have a look at the website and see exactly the mechanisms that we have that you might be able to access.
Thank you so much for that. I do have another question, if you don't mind. So the COVID-19, the associated economic crisis, the Black Lives Matter movement, and recent events in the US following George Floyd's death have exposed systemic and structural inequalities. Liz, you have always said that not all women start from the same starting point, and inequality will affect those with less power to a much greater extent. How does intersectional discrimination affect women, and what should we do about it?
It's such an important topic because, and we're seeing it, I mean, one thing that COVID has done is it has absolutely exposed the structural inequalities that exist in every one of our nations, because women are as diverse as men, and often the women's movement in our nations has lifted particular groups of women to a much greater extent than others. I mean, those women who have less power will experience inequality to a much greater extent. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement has been really indicative of that. Even if I look back here in Australia, I mean, why is it that 30% of our prison population is Indigenous, when Indigenous people represent 2.5% of our population? And if I look at Indigenous women, we know many of them are incarcerated because of a failure to pay fines, because of the situation that many of them live in poverty. So they're, you know, really, I think when you compound gender with cultural, ethnic background, those things compound to actually increase the barriers to particular types of women. So I just urge each of us, and we're doing it more and more even with the private sector, but we're no longer just talking about women as a homogenous group. We're looking at the most disadvantaged groups of women and saying, well, what are the additional barriers that we should be putting in place? And I'm talking about temporary special measures. So in some of our nations, governments are looking at quotas, at targets, also in the private sector, because if you look at Hispanic and Black women in the US, their ability to enter employment is reduced when compared to white American women. And not only that, they're less likely to be promoted. And during this pandemic, they've got double the unemployment rate of white American women. So I think firstly, it's about learning about that. It's about listening to the stories, but where you've got any influence, it's about using that influence to really call out intersectional inequality, and also to use your influence to really reduce the barriers to women from such a whole diverse area of backgrounds moving forward. And I count in that women with disability. We know the rates of sexual assault are so much higher for women with disability. I'd include that gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual women. And I would include in that, of course, what we call culturally and linguistically diverse women, Indigenous women as well. So, and even socioeconomic poor women. Yeah. Thank you
very much. I do have one more question. So among the medical colleagues, it's obviously still very male dominated, particularly at the most senior levels. What should the medical colleagues be doing to ensure that both young men and women can thrive equally in their careers?
Yeah, it's great. I don't know whether it's the same in other countries, but here in Australia, there's no question that across the medical profession, and particularly in the specialist colleges, there's still colleges that were invented by men for men and are largely run by men when you look at the top. And Gabrielle can speak better than most on that, coming from the College of Surgery. But if we want to build a medical capacity where the best and most talented people can thrive, we need to really remove not just the structural, but I'd say it's about culture. When I look at the colleges and even in the way hospitals run and other medical institutions, often they don't have a culture where men and women can thrive equally. And there I'm talking about the prevalence of bullying. I'm talking about the prevalence of everyday sexism and sexual harassment. What we need to do is to, develop cultures where those things firstly don't exist, but the hallmarks of a culture which is healthy are ones where there's strong psychological safety, where I can speak out if something happens to me without being labelled a troublemaker, where people are vulnerable, they're prepared to say that they don't know what the answer is, they're prepared to talk about things that are messy and sad, and where respect and dignity lie at the heart of a culture. So what does it take to get to that place? First part of it, of course, is about strong and leadership. So having leaders who are actually prepared to listen and prepared to be vulnerable. And I think, one of the great examples of that was here in Australia's military. We had some problems with women's treatment in the Australian Defence Force, and it was the senior leaders who were prepared to sit down with women. They sat down with 800 women across the ADF and actually listened to the stories of harm that was happening on their watch and really helping them see what they could, that they needed to do something about this. And there's many stories coming out of that. So I think having leaders who are prepared to listen, stand up strongly, be vulnerable, call out bad culture. And the fact is your culture is set by what you don't accept. So we need to start exiting some of those, even if they're very senior levels, they need to be exited to once again signal to the organisation that we no longer tolerate this type of culture. And I just want to give you one example just from a couple of weeks ago of an individual, a CEO of an organisation who did exactly that. He said that he went to a discussion with some men and women in his team, and one of the gentlemen made a joke loaded with sexual innuendo. Now, what happened then was that all the men laughed, the women laughed, and he said, as a leader of a team, he said, so I laughed as well. And then when he went back to get some feedback from the women, he said to the women, look, how do you think I'm leading on culture and gender equality? They said, you know what, you're really letting us down. He said, but why are you saying that? They said, well, when you were part of that conversation last week, and Steve, the unfunny joker, gave a joke with sexual innuendo, and you laughed. That really let us down. He said, well, wait a tick, I laughed because not only did the men laugh, but the women laughed as well. That's why I laughed. And he said, and the women said to him, well, actually, we laugh because if we don't laugh, we don't fit in. And if we don't fit in, we don't have the opportunity of being promoted in this organisation. But when you laughed, you let us all down. So I think they're the type of micro moments that we need to start calling out. And he said to me, Liz, you know what now? He said, I recognise now that if I'm in a conversation that I wouldn't be happy for my daughter to be in, I stand up and say something right then and right there And I think it's action in those micro moments that every one of us needs to take, but most importantly, our senior leaders as well. Thanks very much, Jessica.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and it's such an important topic. All of these are important topics, so thank you so much. I now have some questions for Lauren Rumble. Are you able to unmute and give me a wave? Everyone a wave?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Jessica.
Perfect. Hi, how are you?
Very well.
So the first question I have is, how has COVID-19 helped to spur workplace reforms that better promote gender equality? What changes have you put in place in your own organisation to work more effectively and prioritise gender equality principles?
Thank you so much, Jessica. And this is a topic that's close to my heart as the mother of 2 young sons, because when I first started working for UNICEF with my first baby, we didn't really have a lot of protections in place. We didn't have breastfeeding breaks or breastfeeding facilities. And so I can still remember my husband arriving with my baby for a quick breastfeeding top up and then whizzing away again in between meetings. Since then, a lot has changed in UNICEF, and we're lucky to have signed on to family-friendly policies in March 2019, together with some other UN agencies. What are those? They are specific times dedicated for breastfeeding breaks and facilities in all offices, regardless of the location. It's education grants and child subsidies. It also includes parental leave, and we've shifted from using the language maternity leave and paternity leave to parental leave, so that parents of all genders can take equal leave with their children. And then, of course, it's about flexible work and making sure that our workplaces are free of discrimination, harassment, and violence. So we had already put some of these policies in place pre-COVID, and we were lucky we did that. We introduced flexible work just around mid last year. When COVID struck, we were ready, just like the example that Liz gave, we were ready to quickly reshift our workforce in countries with lockdown to flexible work. And so although different countries are at different places with lockdown measures around the world, those that do are working very effectively. And so now we are able to stay on the ground and deliver, albeit in slightly more creative and virtual ways. The other kind of really positive change, I think, is that there's a greater empathy and understanding amongst staff about the greater burden that female staff are carrying at home to care for sick relatives and elderly relatives, as well as doing household work and homeschooling. But I shouldn't paint too rosy a picture. It's been one of the feedbacks from our female staff doing pulse surveys and kind of real-time check-ins with staff during this COVID-19 period. We've also seen that our female staff, for the most part, are still carrying the brunt of household chores, care work, and schooling. So we really have to try and think harder and more creatively about how to disrupt that in our offices so that we truly are role models.
Thank you. I do have one more question. So as you described in your talk, crisis can bring opportunity. What are some of the opportunities for UNICEF's programming in the next 6 months?
Thanks a lot, Jessica, for that question. I gave you a hint about it in my video, which is about opening up schools. Here we have a really amazing opportunity for governments and civil society to really open up schools better than they were before. So all those restrictions on girls in particular for accessing school, making sure schools are more affordable, that they're opening up safely, that there's, for example, referral procedures in place for girls and boys that are struggling with mental health or other issues, including violence, that we have proper teacher training and preparation for the school opening, that we have both virtual sessions available now as we see that they can work just as well in a rural context as an urban one, that we can do that free of charge. We also have the rollout of something we're calling Girl Giga, which is an innovation to actually power up all schools, particularly remote and rural schools, with internet connection. This is a partnership with Microsoft and several private sector companies. So we're really happy to be using these kinds of innovations that can go to scale really quickly. And then finally, we want to make schools a place where girls can access the services they need, like menstrual health services, like decent school feeding programs. So what that requires is a whole of government effort, not just ministries of education, not just education sector professionals, but really all of us coming together saying we want schools to be better. We want more education for everyone and better quality education. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That's all the questions I have for the moment. I'll pass it back over to Gabrielle.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Suzanne Stutman. I am a professor emeritus from Penn State University and the first vice president of IHAN. I'm going to read to you today a poem called A Prayer for the Girl Child, and it is my hope that this poem, as well as all of the poems that I have written, can bring some kind of peace to the world. A prayer for the girl child. When I grow up, please let me be safe. Learn to read and write. Live with my parents and my brothers and sisters. Not be sold to work as an indentured servant or a sex slave. Have enough food and clean water to enable me to have a healthy body and soul. Keep my sexual organs intact and not mutilated. Allowed to love and marry the person of my choice. Enabled to keep the children that I bear and to bear as many as I choose. When I grow up, may I discover a world populated by all who honor peace and one another. When I grow up, may we all be at peace. Thank you.
My name is Gabrielle Caspar. I'm a board member of IHAN and past president of the Medical Women's International Association. I'm a gynecologist and an educator who cares and is passionate about women's health and human rights, and have a particular interest in violence against women. My topic is violence against women, the ultimate gender inequality. Today I will discuss violence against women, not because it is more important than violence against men or children, elderly, disabled citizens, people of various race, religion, culture, skin color. No, not at all, but just simply because this parallel event should have taken place at the Commission on the Status of Women. So today I will limit my discussion to violence against women. UN Women describes violence against women and girls as a pervasive human rights violation of pandemic proportions. According to the WHO, and several global surveys suggest half of all women who die from homicide are killed by their current or former husbands or partners. In the United States and Australia, 1/3 of women murdered each year are killed by intimate partners. Citing available country data, UN Women estimate that as many as 70% of women experience physical and sexual violence during their lifetime, the majority occurring at the hands of husbands, intimate partners, or someone else the woman knows. An estimated 150 million girls under 18 suffer some form of sexual violence each year, and as many as 1 in 4 women experience physical and/or sexual violence during pregnancy. Based on World Bank data, the UN concludes that women aged 15 to 44 are more at risk from rape and domestic violence than from cancer, motor accidents, war, and malaria combined. In Victoria, in Australia, partner violence accounts for 7.9% of the overall disease burden among women of reproductive age, and this is larger health risk than factors like raised blood pressure, tobacco use, and increased body weight. Let's look at some specific examples. Women and girls comprise 80% of the estimated 800,000 people who are trafficked annually. Gender-based violence is also increasingly used as a weapon of war. and this includes rape. Rape is cheaper than a bullet. Sexual slavery, genital mutilation, forced pregnancy, forced abortion, forced sterilization. These acts, which violate international human rights and humanitarian law, are often used to achieve military or political objectives in situations of armed conflict. Harmful cultural practices are also an enormous issue. Termination of the female fetus, killing female babies, female genital mutilation, child brides. In India, approximately 22 women are killed each day in dowry-related murders, straight out of violence against women due to beliefs in family honor and sexual purity, ideologies of male sexual entitlement. And then, if it hasn't begun at one end, it goes through to the other. The last one, torture of the widows, especially in India and in Nigeria. Houston, for the Americans on board today, Houston, we have a problem. Violence against women is a pervasive human rights violation of pandemic performance. Violence against women, including sexual violence, is recognized as a serious crime, a serious social issue, and a serious human rights issue. We have an honorable challenge to prevent violence against women. Taking up this challenge is not a charity, but a unique responsibility. The challenge is enormous. Death to violence against women, and long live IHAN and all the NGOs and all the men and women who believe violence against women is the ultimate gender inequality, and the time for action is now.
Hello, I'm Marcy Kahn, and I'm very glad to be with you this evening to discuss New York's new criminal law, the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, which employs a trauma-informed approach to sentencing survivors of domestic violence. I can tell you that from my work as a former prosecutor and former judge in the New York trial and appellate courts, I saw these individuals, overwhelmingly female, who were arrested, tried, and sentenced for crimes committed at the behest of their domestic partner abusers. Through the National Association of Women Judges, I was able to work with a coalition of community leaders and survivors in helping to push for this new law. First, some background. In the United States, we disproportionately imprison women residents. We have 5% of the world's women living here, but we imprison 32% of the world's incarcerated women. In the state of New York, 94% of women in prison had experienced some sort of violence during their lives, and 3/4 of them had experienced domestic partner abuse. The U.S. Health and Human Services Department Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration recognizes that trauma is a health problem. Now, what do they mean by trauma? Trauma results from an event or circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Certainly, domestic abuse creates trauma with its lasting adverse health effects, including on individuals, again, mostly women, who are driven to commit crimes by their abusers. The good news is that we can address trauma if our delivery of services realizes the impact of trauma, recognizes the symptoms of trauma, bases our policy and program response on that knowledge, and resists re-traumatization. New York's new DV sentencing law uses this approach to achieve traditional as well as trauma-informed sentencing of criminal defendants who are survivors of domestic violence. This wheel shows how trauma-informed decisions by the court help reintegrate the offender into society. Traditional notions of sentencing, that's the orange ring, are enhanced by recognition of the effects of the domestic violence in traumatizing the defendant. That provides for a better reintegration. The New York law is unique in the United States. It has two parts, one relating to sentencing in new cases and the other relating to cases that were finished earlier and offers resentencing there if the offender remains incarcerated and is serving a sentence of at least 8 years. In both parts of the law, the court is permitted, upon a satisfactory showing, to exercise its discretion to impose a more lenient sentence than would otherwise be required under our sentencing law. To obtain this relief, the defendant, through her appointed counsel, makes an application for a hearing before the judge, where the prosecutor may oppose the application. The judge then makes a ruling giving reasons. To qualify for relief, the defendant must demonstrate that she meets these three eligibility factors: that she was, at the time of the crime, the victim of substantial domestic abuse as shown by objective evidence, that the abuse significantly contributed to her criminal acts, and that under the circumstances, a traditional sentence would be unduly harsh. Now, this law was enacted just a year ago, and we are still in the very early stages of applying it. I do not have trends or anything like that to discuss with you tonight. We are just now training both judges and lawyers on the operation of the law and on trauma-informed sentencing. But what I can tell you is that it would not have been possible to achieve this law without a decade-long effort of dozens of community groups and returning survivor citizens coming together to work for its adoption. I thank you for your attention, and I send a big thank you to my colleagues who contributed to this presentation and to the passage of the Act.
Hi, I'm Lillian Dooley and I'm a fourth-year law commerce student at Deakin University. I'll be talking about the free legal services available to women survivors of violence in Australia. Legal aid commissions deliver an extensive variety of legal services in criminal, family and civil law matters. Some legal support is provided free of charge, including through brochures, information meetings or mobile legal advice. Although legal aid does provide help to many individuals, in order to be eligible for funding or legal representation, you must gratify the means and merits test and meet the applicable Legal Aid Commission guidelines. However, many people do not satisfy the means and merits test but cannot afford legal representation. This is where not-for-profit organisations are a great assistance. Women's Legal Services Australia is a national network of community legal centres that focus on women's legal matters. Their mission is to endorse a legal system that is safe, supportive, non-discriminatory and receptive to the needs of women accessing justice. Member organisations are available in every state throughout Australia. Individual member centres advocate for law and policy that respects and also promotes the rights of women. Community legal centres can provide free legal help to people, including women survivors of violence, in their dedicated area. West Justice, a CLC located in the western suburbs of Melbourne, have specialised family law and family violence legal clinics that focus on improving the safety of women and children in Melbourne's west. They can assist women survivors of violence in obtaining intervention orders, safe housing and trauma support. They also assist with projects such as early intervention and high-risk family violence training and drafting law reform submissions to do with family violence. A community legal centre I have personally volunteered at, Flemington and Kensington Community Legal Centre, also have a great focus on improving women's survivors of violence access to justice. They assist women in obtaining IVOs as well as varying the conditions. They also can assist women and children in making a victims of crime application where they can receive compensation and free psychological assistance from the state if a crime was committed against them. They can assist in helping victims recover from a crime by providing financial assistance for expenses incurred or reasonably likely to be occurred as a direct result of the crime. IHAN. Conclusively, all Australian women have access to free legal resources through legal aid, but not everyone qualifies to receive funding for legal representation. Not-for-profit organisations are able to assist women experiencing violence so that they are able to be safe in their community. Thank you.
I bring you warm greetings as the president of the Medical Women's International Association. And I just want to thank IHAN, the School of Medicine Sydney, and Fordham Institute for Women and Girls for inviting me. My topic today is harmful cultural practices, a global solution. So what are harmful practices? They are any and all practices in every sphere, including public, private, virtual, and online domains that exclude, restrict, impair, or nullify the fundamental human rights and equality of human beings. And today, we're talking about harmful practices again as a violence against women and girls. And therefore, I want to start out with something that I've been working on with my NGO in Nigeria, the Widows Development Organization. In 1995, I came across harmful practices against widows being perpetrated and realized that widows were being dehumanized, marginalized, and blamed for issues, for example, around witchcraft. These accusations happen in Tanzania, Ghana, Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa, as well as Nigeria. They undergo disinheritance of their property that belongs to themselves and their husbands, but it's taken away when their husbands die. There are cleansing practices where the widow is forced to be cleansed either in a river or she is raped as a means of cleansing. The widow may be forced to be married by the next surviving male, and that's the levirate. We also have issues around forceful shaving of hair, of the hair on the head, etc. So these are some of the practices, but I am happy to say that after 25 years of working to change laws locally, we have been able to empower widows. I just want to share with you the fact that several years ago, I had the opportunity of working with Professor Gay Casper, and Professor Gay Casper, through the Medical Women's International Association, was one of those who encouraged me. And there we are in 2001 and 2013 with support for the Widows Development Organization. Today, widows are not victims. They are survivors thriving. And here you have them in the community with a village savings and loans training. And here you have them celebrating their own mill, where they have a palm oil mill. Having said that, widowhood practices is just one of several harmful practices. You know, a lot of us know about female genital mutilation or female genital cutting. Less known about, for example, is breast ironing, a situation where girls in their puberty have hot stones or hot iron pressed on their breasts to stop the breasts from maturing so that they look more like men or boys and less likely to be abducted in the Boko Haram war. This is going on as we speak in northern Cameroon. There are issues around early marriage, for example, where girls are married early, as sometimes children at the age of 9 who are married early. And then there are the issues around infertility. Such a high premium is put on fertility that women now culturally, in a harmful way, go and pay a dowry on a young girl who they then present to their husbands to help to bring children into the family. So going back to widows, it's important to, therefore, not to look at widows only in the context of the elderly. Because of early marriage, we have child widows. Because of conflicts, we have conflict widows. We have half widows who are wives of the disappeared. We have widows of epidemics like HIV, AIDS, and Ebola. And therefore, when you look at issues right now, we are going through the pandemic because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But I put it to you that we really have a pandemic within a pandemic, because we have violence against women and girls as a pandemic intersecting with the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are increased reports. We are looking now for concrete and verified data, but we do have reports from communities out of Kenya, for example, that there are increased child marriages due to economic oppression, increased female genital mutilation due to reduced availability of human rights defenders who would otherwise be in the communities. I bring you a global solution. I wear another hat as the founding co-chair of a global movement that is advocating for a global treaty to end violence against women and girls. Having worked in Nigeria, I know that laws can bring about change if they are implemented. Yes, implementation still remains a problem, but in order for us to bring about that global change, we need to make sure that we have laws, global norms that will change these practices in the same way that the Tobacco Treaty has changed the narrative from "it is my right to smoke" to "it is my right to breathe clean air." We need to train and retrain the responders, physicians like myself, lawyers, judges, the police, to respond to cases where we have violence, especially harmful traditional practices. We also need to make sure that there are appropriate shelters and safe spaces where those who are undergoing these harmful practices can be protected, where we can look after their mental health. We need to make sure that there's prevention education. It's not just a cliche that prevention is better than cure. How can we prevent those who are the perpetrators, our men, our boys, community leaders? How can we bring the prevention education to them? How can we ensure that there is targeted, ring-fenced budgeting? We need funding that is specific to ending violence against women and girls, and in particular, harmful practices. Dear friends, we can raise our voices. We can be that voice for the voiceless. Let's tell the story. Let's come together. Let's band together. I urge you to sign the global treaty to bring an end to all forms of violence against women and girls, including harmful practices. Please go to the website, everywoman.org. Thank you for listening.
Good afternoon. I'm Beatrice Goodwin, and I want to talk with you about femicide in Latin America, the ultimate violence. Femicide has a number of definitions that vary in usage and subsequent punishment. Femicide is quite simply murder of a woman due to gender conflict. As contrasted with homicide, more clearly denoting men, femicide has had a checkered impact on the perceived seriousness of the crime and how it may be investigated and prosecuted. For many, introduction to femicide came via Mexico. Juarez, just across the border from El Paso, Texas, welcomed a migration of up to 60,000 women a year because factories provided work there. Many of the women were murdered, often going to or from work. Bodies were often mutilated, dismembered, grossly defiled. The Juarez tragedy was years in duration. We must take note that NGOs, especially larger ones, can take on companies as well as countries to protect human rights. Juarez was helped in its solution for its notorious problem with such action. NGOs of lesser size and resources could well exert power by joining together with well-defined objectives. Femicide, though defined as a crime, often enjoys impunity both from investigation and prosecution. Both the crime of violent attacks and frequent impunity are thought to be rooted in patriarchal, machista, or sexist cultures and the desire to sustain patriarchal power relations. The hierarchical system of power between men and women is understood as the main determinant of femicide. 3 Central American countries, Honduras and Guatemala, constitute one of the world's most violent regions. El Salvador has the highest rate of violence outside a war zone. A woman is murdered there every 18 hours. The murder of women in Guatemala has tripled since the year 2000. In Argentina, a beach resort city has a bustling prostitution trade as well as many femicides. Prostitution enjoys robust police protection. The perspective of such guardians considers prostitution a legitimate form of work. Trafficking of women is also involved in this endeavor. Femicide in Mexico is only one of the criminal activities challenging life of its citizens. In 2018, 3,580 women were killed in Mexico. 98% of those deaths were patriarchal. This year, 100,000 women marched to Mexico's city's Zocalo and to begin 2 days of nationwide rallies focused on the national emergency of femicide and violence against women. After 50 years of civil war in Colombia, there is still a struggle with curtailing the violence related to cartels and the production of addictive drugs. Yet the Colombian population remains resourceful and hopeful. Women of Latin America are learning more about their rights as humans and as women, and working hard for a better life. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sarah Forsyth.
And I'm Anna Maria Kmanowitz.
We are 30 medical students from the University of Notre Dame in Sydney. And we're speaking today on the importance of teaching medical students, our future doctors, about violence against women. We're focusing on intimate partner violence here, IPV. And we would like to share with you how this is incorporated into the curriculum at our university. IPV is a prevalent and pervasive problem in Australia, as it is globally. In Australia, 1 in 6 women have experienced physical or sexual IPV. 1 in 4 women have experienced emotional IPV. And distressingly, 1 woman every week, on average, is murdered by their current or ex-partner. IPV is a major public health issue and may result in significant adverse physical and mental health outcomes for women and also their children. In order to make progress on the Sustainable Development Goals and promote good health and well-being and gender equality, then we need to take the issue of IPV seriously. As future doctors, we will see women who have experienced IPV. For many women, a doctor is the first and only way of disclosing and accessing support. However, many do not disclose, and this silence may be from fear, shame, embarrassment, or denial, or simply not recognising their situation as abusive. Research tells us that women are more likely to disclose IPV if they have been asked, believed, listened to without judgment, and supported in their decision-making moving forwards. And doctors are more likely to ask about IPV if they have undergone training, have increased awareness of the issue, and have knowledge of the supports available. Training medical students, our future doctors, will increase opportunities for women with IPV to be asked and to receive the support that they need.
There are a myriad of barriers to IPV training for future doctors. This includes lack of time in the course, lack of resources, funding, or faculty commitment, assumptions that the content will be covered elsewhere, or not perceiving it as a medical problem. Studies conducted in Australia and the UK have identified that junior doctors receive little to no training on intimate partner violence during medical school. Only 2 of 15 Australian medical schools have implemented comprehensive IPV programs in their curriculum, including an integrated advocacy-based approach. Notre Dame is a university that takes a pedagogical approach with training embedded into the curriculum through exposing students to IPV, sexual assault, and non-accidental injury. This is through lectures responding to survivors of IPV and sexual violence facilitated through sexual assault services, and violence against women taught through workshops that facilitate care for survivors of sexual assault. In their final year of training, students have tutorials that address reasons why women fail to present to police after abuse, how pregnancy is a high-risk time for IPV, and place emphasis on how to take a sensitive history and examination, which is taught and then reinforced through clinical years. Students are also taught how to implement safety plans and what services are available for the protection of victims and their families. We leave you with a slide of quotes from future doctors who have received this training. Exposure to IPV and sexual assault training prior to entering the health workforce gives us the appropriate awareness considering the prevalence and seriousness of the problem. Thus, we advocate strongly for the inclusion of IPV and sexual assault training to be embedded in the medical curriculum. It is more than just women's health. It is holistic, patient-centered care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nikki Raftopoulos as our next person for asking questions. I'm very, very, very sorry, but we're really, really running late. And I'm wondering, Nikki, if you could just give one, I think you've got a lot that have come through, but maybe just one for Marcy Khan and just one for Eleanor. Thank you.
Sure, no worries. If you can hear me, just give me a bit of a wave. Great. So thank you to all speakers for your wonderful talks. The first question is for Justice Khan. You spoke about objective evidence. So what sort of objective evidence would be required to make a defendant eligible for relief under the statute?
Well, it really can't be just the say-so of the defendant. That is insufficient. Various types of objective evidence are acceptable. The statute doesn't limit it, it just refers to objective evidence. But for example, a police report that is relatively contemporaneous with the commission of the offense would be an objective piece of evidence. A doctor's report or a doctor's chart that might have documented whether the offender patient had been forthright about how she got to be injured or not. But if the doctor's working hypothesis is that she was the victim of domestic violence, or as you in Australia call it, intimate partner violence, that could be in a medical record that could be used. This is much easier, of course, for the sentencing cases, the cases that are new and open now, than it is for the resentencing cases, where some of the offenders have been incarcerated for 15 years already, and they would have to go back and get a contemporaneous piece of objective evidence. A witness statement could ostensibly qualify.
Thank you, Justice Khan. Sorry we ran out of time for more questions. I now have a question for Dr. Nwanobi. Could you tell us a little bit more about Boko Haram, and is it still active?
Thank you. Yes, sadly, Boko Haram is still very active in Nigeria at the moment. In fact, just in the last 2 weeks, we had, a really terrible attack, and their tactics sadly are changing. Whereas, we had a faction of Boko Haram that were, targeting security sector personnel. Now we have the tactic where they are attacking more of civilian populations. And as you can imagine, it's the women and girls that, are the most vulnerable in this. And just to raise the issue, as I spoke about widowhood and harmful practice is that because of the child now have widows, and I'm sure that our colleague from UNICEF will also tell you that we are also having issues of children bearing children to Boko Haram, and sadly there is a high level of stigma regarding the forced wives of Boko Haram, and an even higher level of stigma regarding children born to Boko Haram. So we have a broad spectrum of challenges regarding violent conflict.
Eleanor, we just lost you. Thank you very, very, very much. We'll move on to the next section now on maternal, sexual and reproductive health.
The topic is ending maternal mortality and morbidity. The time for gender equality is now.
3, go.
Hello, my name is Rosemary Ogu. I'm a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Port Harcourt. And I'm a consultant obstetrician gynecologist at the University of Port Harcourt Teaching Hospital. I'm an advocate for maternal health, for women's health, to ensure that women do not die when giving birth, during pregnancy and childbirth. The inequality associated with gender is one of the reasons why we continually have women dying during childbirth and delivery. The gender inequality is such that pregnant women are unable to take decisions for their own care because they are waiting for their men. Because they are waiting for their men to be the ones to give consent for surgery. Because they are waiting for their men to be the ones to pay for services. Because they are waiting for their men to provide blood for transfusion.
My name is Rosemary Ogu. I'm an advocate for women's health, for maternal health, for ending maternal mortality and morbidity. The death of a woman while bringing forth child continues unabated because of gender inequality. It continues because it is happening to a woman. It is one of the consequences of gender inequality. The time for gender equality is now. It is time for a world with equal ease of access to resources and opportunities regardless of gender. It is time for a world where economic participation and decision making is equal regardless of gender. Sadly, we don't have that yet. Women still depend on men for everything. Let us look at maternal health. The health of a woman while pregnant. Globally, over 300,000 women die during childbirth annually. Antenatal care and delivery with skilled attendants in a hospital could save them. Yet, pregnant women miss antenatal clinic visits because their man is not around. Pregnant women cannot give consent for life-saving surgery because they are waiting for the man to take the decision. So when pregnant women finally present to the hospital on their own, majority of them are unable to provide for themselves. They cannot pay for services. They cannot provide money needed. They cannot provide the money needed for medication, anesthetic drugs, intravenous fluids, and consumables. As a hospital policy, we provide care to everyone presenting with an emergency. Unfortunately, this drains the scarce resources of the hospital, and we have stockouts. So we then depend on philanthropists and well-meaning individuals to come to our aid in providing supplies necessary to treat patients. If you'd like to help, we deeply appreciate. Together, we can make things happen. Thank you.
We can change the narrative. Now is the time to end gender inequality. We got this scan machine from Australia. and it will help him. Together we can do more. If you'd like to help, please join us. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Emily. And I'm Ellen. And today we're talking about Sustainable Development Goal 5 and its impact on women's health. This goal consists of 6 key targets and respective indicators that we're focusing on today. The first target is to end all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere. To do so, legal frameworks need to be in place. And while progress has been made over the past 25 years, unfortunately, still to this day, women earn only 77 cents for every dollar that men get for the same work. This isn't just an economic issue, but also a health issue. Poor job security and income leaves women to have decreased access to basic, affordable healthcare. The second key target is to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. Data from 106 countries show that currently 1 in 5 ever partnered women and girls aged between 15 and 49 have experienced physical and/or sexual partner violence in the past 12 months. This is a critical health issue because it directly relates to an increased amount of injuries, increased mental health illnesses, and increased partner violence also leads to increased pregnancy complications and an increased risk of smoking and alcohol misuse. The third key target is to ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health. Whilst progress has been made in order to achieve this goal, still barriers exist, with over 20% of countries still having minimum age requirements and requiring third-party authorisation to achieve contraceptive services. If women are unable to access basic contraception, then ultimately their health and morbidity is impacted.
The next target is to eliminate all harmful practices such as child and forced marriage and female genital mutilation. There's been progress in this area with fewer girls being forced into early marriage, and overall rates of female genital mutilation have declined by more than 25% over the last 3 decades. However, progress is still much slower than we would like it to be. And if we want to achieve the 2030 target of ending female genital mutilation, the rate of reduction must increase at least 13-fold of the current rate. The next target is to recognise and value unpaid care and domestic work. Women are spending roughly 3 times more hours a day on unpaid care and domestic work than men. This limits the time available for things like paid work and education, which is only reinforcing gender-based socioeconomic disadvantages. The final target is ensuring women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making in political, economic, and public life. Whilst there has been some progress, women continue to be underrepresented at all levels of political leadership, and in some countries, such as Papua New Guinea, not a single female holds a seat in national parliament. This massive underrepresentation of women in politics is a major contributor to exacerbating gender inequality, with low levels of decision-making on the part of women in important areas such as sexual and reproductive health issues and many other health issues. More ambitious measures and quotas are needed to boost women's political participation and empowerment. Achieving gender equality requires addressing the structural issues, such as these low levels of political participation. Whilst we've made some progress, we still have a long way to go. And something to be mindful of in this climate of the COVID-19 pandemic is the possibility that the limited progress that we have made could be reversed.
Thanks so much for listening to our talk.
Thanks.
Yes.
Good morning all. My name is Tom Williams and I'll be speaking with my colleague Miss Arabella Rawpar on maternal morbidity and mortality rates around the globe and the impact of the Birthing Kit Foundation Australia. I thought I would take this opportunity at the start of the presentation to define maternal mortality and morbidity. Mortality is the death of a woman while pregnant or within 42 days of delivery or termination of pregnancy from any cause related to or aggregated by pregnancy or its management. excluding deaths from incidental or accidental causes. Maternal morbidity refers to any health condition attributed to and/or aggravated by pregnancy and childbirth that has a negative impact on the woman's well-being. The most common cause of morbidity includes postpartum hemorrhage, hypertension, and diabetes. The current prevalence of this around the world is ashamedly high. In 2017, approximately 810 women died every day as a result of complications of pregnancy or childbirth, the majority of which, sadly, are preventable or treatable. The brunt of this issue is most felt in low socioeconomic countries. Of the 295,000 women who died during the following pregnancy and childbirth in 2017, 94% of these occurred in low-resource settings, and the maternal mortality ratio, which is the number of maternal deaths per 100,000 live births, in developing countries remains 14 times higher than in developed countries. With regard to an update on global progress, Goal 5 of the Millennium Development Goals set by the WHO in 2000 was to reduce maternal mortality by 75% and achieve universal access to reproductive health by 2015. While the maternal mortality ratio decreased by 38% between 2000 and 2017, progress has been slow, and the WHO targets have not yet been met. The UN Sustainable Development Goals have now set a target by 2030 to reduce the goal MMR to less than 70 per 100,000 births, but with no country having an MMR more than twice the global average. One of the major factors that accounts for morbidity and mortality in females is infection, which my colleague Arabella will now discuss.
Thank you, Tom. Along with hemorrhage, chronic health conditions, preeclampsia, and obstetric complications, infection is one of the major contributors to maternal mortality, accounting for 11% of maternal deaths worldwide. As Tom mentioned, it disproportionately affects women in developing countries due to poorer access to clean sanitary products. This demonstrates that this issue is largely preventable by provision of improved hygiene. This is where Birthing Kit Foundation Australia, known as BKFA, aims to evoke change. BKFA is a not-for-profit organisation that has been providing a practical solution to improving maternal morbidity and mortality. It does this firstly by partnering with local organisations to address region-specific issues, for example, facilitating discussions around sexual and reproductive health and training local midwives in antenatal care. Secondly, BKFA distributes birthing kits to low-resource countries to reduce infection rates. These kits are assembled by community groups here in Australia and consist of a simple Ziploc bag containing 6 vital clean items: soap, a plastic sheet to place under the mother during birth, gloves, gauze, and string ties and a sterile blade to cut the umbilical cord safely. Our university had the opportunity last year to be involved in this process by assembling 400 birthing kits. These kits are then distributed to a number of disadvantaged countries around the world, specifically to health centres, hospitals, community-based midwives and health workers, traditional birth attendants, and directly to pregnant women. In the 2018-2019 period, over 200,000 birthing kits were sent to 18 countries, the majority going to Nigeria, Somalia, Uganda, and Afghanistan. We hope that initiatives like these will continue to improve the trajectory of maternal mortality and morbidity rates around the world, particularly those due to preventable causes more prevalent in developing countries, such as infection and sepsis. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rose Clark.
My name is Grace Lynch.
And today we'll be zooming in on the #1 cause of maternal mortality around the world, postpartum hemorrhage or PPH. As the burden of this condition is greatest in developing or low-income countries, we'll be focusing on the specific issues associated with PPH in these regions. PPH is defined as a blood loss of 500 mils or more within 24 hours after birth. The global statistics are pretty devastating. It affects around 5% of all women giving birth, and nearly a quarter of all maternal deaths are associated with PPH. In most countries, there are no identifiable risk factors, and is estimated to cause the death of a woman every 10 minutes around the world. Preventing PPH from happening is the best way to prevent mortality and morbidity. The ideal standard of care is known as active management of the 3rd stage of labour, which is the delivery of the placenta. The administration of prophylactic uterotonic medications are drugs that will help the uterus contract, such as oxytocin, should be offered to all women around the world during their 3rd stage of labour. In Australia, most developed countries, if PPH does occur, there are many steps that can be taken to manage the bleeding. The first steps are physical methods, such as uterine massage or bimanual compression. The next step is similar to prevention, giving uterotonic drugs. The final steps involve surgical procedures, such as inserting a balloon into the uterus, suturing it, or even removing the uterus as a last resort. The problem is 99% of maternal deaths due to PPH occur in low and middle income countries. There are multiple obstacles to the implementation of these interventions, which we've described in low income settings, due to resource poor healthcare settings and the degradation of infrastructure evident in many countries.
Some of these obstacles include the cost of uterotonic drugs and surgical implements and the availability of adequate treatment, including difficulties in rapidly accessing surgical facilities in very remote areas. Secondly, storage and transport is a problem. Oxytocin, the first-line drug for the prevention and management of PPH, is a heat-sensitive drug and requires constant refrigeration to maintain its quality. To implement evidence-based practice, sufficient training of healthcare workers and widespread access to the guidelines for the management of PPH are necessary. Finally, in many of these countries, most women deliver at home without a skilled birth attendant. To combat some of these obstacles, the World Health Organization has identified multiple recommendations for the best management of PPH globally. Firstly, the administration of any safe uterotonic available is recommended for both the prevention and management of PPH. If the quality of oxytocics are compromised due to lack of cold storage, heat-stable options exist, such as carbetocin. Misoprostol is an exciting uterotonic drug as it doesn't require skills in IV administration, so it can be given orally or even self-administered. A recent recommendation is the use of IV tranexamic acid for all women with PPH. It is a drug already routinely used in the management of trauma and major surgeries, so no additional resources or infrastructure in hospitals is required to implement this potentially life-saving recommendation. Despite these recommendations, the mortality rate remains unacceptable because of PPH. More research, funding, and innovation is required to find creative solutions to combat this devastating complication. Some examples of innovative solutions include using two common and cheap items, a condom and a urinary catheter, to create a uterine balloon that can be used to surgically manage PPH. Another is the anti-shock garment that was invented by the military to temporarily reduce bleeding on the battlefield. Finally, there is research into task shifting, ways of transferring the responsibility of managing PPH to community healthcare workers and traditional birth attendants. As you can see, the issues surrounding PPH are complex, and there will be no band-aid solution. It will require systemic change, reducing poverty and improving access to healthcare for women all around the world. Our aim today was to highlight some of the general principles and issues in the management of PPH, particularly in low-income countries. We hope we've raised some awareness of how much work there still is to do in this area and the need to implement protocols that will target equality for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mira Gandhi.
And I'm Jessica Brown.
And today we're speaking about homelessness during pregnancy, specifically the global health services available and the impact of COVID-19.
Women who are pregnant and the homeless constitute a unique group at significant risk of adverse fetal and maternal outcomes. Despite this heightened risk profile, social housing support to this group of women is still less than satisfactory.
A significant proportion of homeless Australians are women. And in 2018 to 2019, 60% of homeless people seeking and receiving assistance from specialist services were women. The largest group of homeless women in Australia are between the ages of 25 and 34. There isn't much accurate data on how many homeless women are pregnant in Australia. However, it is known that homeless women experience higher rates of reproductive health-related traumas, such as unplanned pregnancies, abortion, and miscarriages. Additionally, homelessness is associated with high rates of unintended pregnancy. Homeless women are often forced into sex and engage in survival sex for food, money, shelter, or drugs.
So what is the impact of homelessness on pregnancy? Well, in general, homeless individuals suffer more mental and physical health in comparison to the wider population. Homeless pregnant women are more likely to be affected by acute and chronic health problems, including inadequate weight gain, anemia, and bleeding disorders. There are practical barriers for homeless women to maintaining a healthy diet, including a lack of storage of refrigeration for fresh, healthy food. Experiences of prenatal homelessness cause higher rates of risk factors for poor perinatal outcomes, including low birth weight and preterm birth. Pregnant homeless women are less likely than other pregnant women to attend antenatal care for a number of reasons. Homeless women face barriers to accessing healthcare services, including concern that their baby will be taken from them, lack of transport, cost, wait time, difficulty reading and writing, unsatisfactory relationships with healthcare providers, and a lack of understanding of the importance of prenatal care.
Identified needs of homeless pregnant women include prioritisation of stable housing, support to transition to independent housing, coordination of responses, and, importantly, trauma-informed models of care. Research has shown that homeless women require provision of transport to access prenatal care, and that they prefer a group model of prenatal care. Throughout Australia, there are a range of services tailored towards supporting pregnant homeless women find accommodation and the right medical and government services, some of which we've listed here. There are similar services in America and the UK. However, there is a lack of information regarding statistics and services on homeless pregnant women in Europe, Africa, and Asia. It's predicted that the percentage of pregnant homeless women will be much higher, particularly in Africa, due to forced displacement, which leaves women travelling without food, water, or professional pregnancy services. This is particularly worrying considering Africa has the highest rates of maternal mortality.
So lastly, the impact of COVID-19 on pregnancy. As we know, COVID has spread swiftly around the globe, and governments and public health officials have been urging people to follow aggressive preventative measures, most importantly of which has been to shelter in a safe place. However, for women experiencing homelessness, these measures are quite impossible. Precarious living conditions paired with compromised immune systems, lack of access to adequate medical resources, and the inability to self-isolate put women experiencing homelessness at a significantly higher risk of contracting, transmitting, and dying from COVID-19. So obviously, pregnant homeless women represent a vulnerable group of people who could be better served by a coordinated approach to provision of care to ensure good outcomes for mother and baby. Of note, further research should be undertaken to accurately capture the prevalence of homeless pregnant women.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so from 2018, myself and Eleanor have been undertaking medical aid work in the Philippines, and we've been doing this in a community in the town of Calauan, Laguna. And this is a community with very poor health outcomes, and for women in particular, there is very low health literacy regarding fertility, contraception, and sexually transmitted infections. And so to address this, a biannual medical clinic was established from 2013, and in particular it delivers a women's health clinic that Eleanor and I have been involved in. And so the focus of this clinic is to deliver through a single visit approach cervical screening, and this consists of colposcopy but also visual inspection with acetic acid and Lugol's iodine. And from November 2018, we've also been conducting HPV testing. And since 2013, we have screened over 900 women. And we are also to empower the women of this community and to help them to make decisions in the best interests of their health. We've also been delivering education seminars, and those focus on fertility and the menstrual cycle, contraception and the choice to conceive, and HPV and cervical cancer. And we've also been undertaking some epidemiological studies, which I'll now pass on to Eleanor to discuss further.
Great, thanks so much, Oscar. So yeah, as Oscar entailed, since 2013, this project has been run. And as a result, from 7 years of the clinic running, we've accumulated lots of data in terms of risk factors and which women are at higher risk, and again, which women are developing cervical cancer. And so I guess I'll get you to move to the next slide. As Oscar said previously, so cervical cancer is the second most common cancer in the Philippines, and it is the #1 cause of mortality in females. And as we know here, most cervical cancers are attributable to HPV, which is why we have the HPV vaccine here in Australia. However, there is no immunisation program in the Philippines. So there are 3 techniques you can use to screen for cervical cancer. There's a cytology screening, the visual inspection, which is used in developed countries, and it's pictured here with the A and the B. So the A is the acetic acid and the B is the iodine. And that is what has been happening in the Philippines in the clinic from 2013 to 2018. However, from 2018, what we introduced was HPV testing, which is looking for the human papillomavirus, which is a precursor for 99% of cervical cancers. So in terms of the study, we wanted to see what the prevalence was of HPV, and in particular, the different strains of HPV. And not only this, we wanted to compare those results to the results that we found with the iodine and the acetic acid. Now, this study is still being conducted, and these are only preliminary results. However, what we have found so far is that 319 patients, so from 2018 to now, have gone through the clinic and have had the HPV screening, and of those, 50 were positive. What we found, which was quite interesting, is while in Australia we mainly get HPV strains 16 and 18, and that is what our immunisation protects against, here in this clinic we found 16, 18, 31, and I'm sure you all can read many more strains. And that's depicted in this pie chart where you've got 18 and 16 making up a real minority, and then HPV 52 actually making up 21% of the HPV strains. So I guess in terms of further research and further development of the study, there still needs to be analysis on whether or not any risk factors are leading to the HPV strains, and not only this, whether or not the iodine and acetic acid screening was detecting the patients at high risk. And so that is going to be looked into further. This is only a preliminary result and just some of the work that we've been doing in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello to you all. My name is Charles Arcus, and I'm a registrar in obstetrics and gynecology in Sydney, Australia. And I'm very humbled by this opportunity to speak today, and I applaud the event focus on gender equality. As a doctor ready to embark upon a career in women's health, I was fortunate enough to spend time in Papua New Guinea, in the Pacific shores just off the Australian coast, and in both Port Moresby and in the Western Highland province of PNG, I spent some time in hospital with resilient and capable staff who delivered excellent healthcare in the face of inadequate state and health infrastructure. But I also lived with some socially concerned locals who offered me just a glimpse into what sort of impact pervasive government corruption, deep socioeconomic inequities, and entrenched cultural customs can have on the delivery of health outcomes for women. They very much inspired me to pursue O&G as an avenue for health advocacy, and made me realise how intimately connected women's health is with the way society and its culture is put together. And so today I thought that I would share some of my observations of my time, and particularly of the barriers to optimising women's health that arise from and extend beyond limited access and inadequate service provision. In PNG, extreme pathology and severe morbidity is driven as much by late presentation and loss to follow-up as it is by a lack of electricity and clean water. This is in part because most people in PNG live in rural areas and find it very difficult to traverse the terrain and leave their community. The roads to town are not well maintained either, and perhaps a metaphor for the struggle PNG faces as it aims to evolve from a nation comprised of many agrarian societies to one that reconciles tradition with Western development. It's difficult to leave home also because many women have large families, limited means to travel, and no reliable income. The city is dangerous too, and many women who reluctantly leave their home are isolated from their tribe and now mixing with people traditionally viewed as strangers. So sadly, this means that many women have unsupervised village deliveries or present to the city hospital with an obstetric emergency in the context of rural isolation and poor Western health literacy. Any interaction care providers have with a woman is thus a precious opportunity to encourage family planning. but counselling appears difficult in the face of the desire to produce a male, expectations for large families who can better cultivate their land, and pressures on women to produce children to honour the financial transaction made at the seal of marriage. Barriers to women's health such as these need urgent but sensitive and thoughtful attention, and as advocates for women's health inside and outside the hospital, may we continue to provide such attention and support those working in challenging circumstances. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jane McDonnell, and I'm a doctor working in obstetrics and gynecology in Sydney's Royal North Shore Hospital. Australia prides itself on its universal healthcare system, achieving some of the best health outcome measures internationally. However, this good health is not shared equally. Indigenous women suffer poorer sexual and reproductive health outcomes than non-Indigenous women, perpetuating social disadvantage. I performed a systematic review aiming to identify barriers to sexual health and reproductive autonomy amongst Indigenous Australian women. 4 main thematic categories of barriers emerged. The first was vulnerability, sexual coercion, and unbalanced power dynamics. Vulnerability was a major barrier to women negotiating conditions of sexual relationships. Sexual coercion included threats, condom use refusal, and intimate partner violence. Sociocultural norms led to unbalanced power dynamics, where women's roles were seen as reproductive rather than self-determined. The second is health literacy and education. There is widespread lack of knowledge regarding contraceptive options, including emergency contraception, STI risk, and STI transmission. There was low uptake of formal education due to absenteeism and student embarrassment. Resources on sexual health were of limited use due to poor English literacy. The third, system and structural barriers. Structural barriers such as difficulty negotiating the health system, transport for women in remote areas, and lack of culturally sensitive or female health workers undercut the provision or uptake of health services. For women travelling for obstetric care, isolation and loneliness were major barriers to relocation for birth. And finally, unsuitable or inadequate contraception and alcohol. There is underutilisation of contraception in Indigenous communities. Women who are dissatisfied with a particular contraceptive are unaware of alternatives. Some studies reported a link between alcohol consumption and lack of contraception, and also to sexual violence. So what can we draw from all this? We know that socio-cultural, structural, and health system-related factors contribute to Indigenous Australian women's social vulnerability. Reproductive coercion, unbalanced power dynamics, intimate partner violence, and reputational damage undermine women's reproductive autonomy and sexual agency. Sexual education needs to be in an accessible language and format, should start earlier in schooling years, and needs to be done with interventions that increase women's self-efficacy and reduce gender-based violence. Long-acting reversible contraception, such as intrauterine devices, are inexpensive, covert, require few appointments, and can reduce unintended pregnancies. To the future, there is scope for adopting a strengths-based approach, looking at enablers to sexual health and reproductive autonomy, such as strong female role models and positive relationships with female family members, because the time for gender equality is now.
Hello, my name is Anna Pepperly. I am a recent Master of Social Work graduate from Fordham University in New York, and I am so excited to be speaking to you today about immigrant women's access to sexual and reproductive health. A multitude of federal restrictions within the United States, along with many intersectional factors, have made accessing healthcare difficult for immigrant families. The Guttmacher Institute looked at how implementing the Health Equity and Access Under the Law, or HEAL, Immigrant and Families Act, which has been introduced in the U.S. Congress, would remove legal barriers to coverage and boost eligibility for 3 particular groups: lawfully present immigrants, DACA recipients, and undocumented immigrants. By striking down these walls, immigrant women improve their ability to obtain critical health services and the information they need. During COVID-19, health services and information may not be available. However, the World Health Organization states that sexual and reproductive health is an essential service. Yet, during pandemics, access to reproductive services can be severely disrupted. The impact is intense. Even a 10% reduction to reproductive services could result in an estimated 15 million unintended pregnancies and 3.3 million unsafe abortions. What can be done? We can prioritize digital access, self-care interventions, and outreach into the community. The Migrant Clinicians Network states that in order to bring about change, we can do the following: allow walk-in appointments and extend care hours past the average workday. Also, incorporate promotoras into the clinical care team. These are bilingual women who have experienced sexual violence and go into their communities to educate and create consciousness around sexual and reproductive health. Also, we can make sure that educational components are culturally appropriate and available in all languages spoken within the community. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Liz Manis, and I obtained my master's in social work from Fordham University in New York City. I represent the IFSW, the International Federation of Social Work at the United Nations, and I am an LGBTQIA ally and will be giving a brief presentation using the 3 articles seen on the screen. LGBTQIA+ sexual education is sexual health for everyone. Sexual health is directly linked to family planning. The first article gives a history of the LGBTQ sexual education in schools in the United States and its challenges. Historically, sexual education has been about preventing pregnancy and STDs as opposed to understanding one's gender and sexuality. In the United States, sexual education from the school is governed by state, and actual content is up to the school district, which becomes hyper-specific to where you live. There are slight differences between what is required and what is permitted, and there are no specific outlines on how it is done. As a result, sexual health education differs from school to school. Religious groups, school board members, parents, and teachers are some of the people who influence sexual education in schools, and lawsuits have occurred in the U.S. to fight diversity in sexual education. The lack of attention given to the LGBTQ population in sexual health classes in schools gives the message that the LGBTQ population are not accepted. This decreases emotional and social well-being, and as a result, there's an increased risk in suicide, homelessness, and high-risk behavior. There are many benefits to including fluidity and sexuality in gender and education. All students have an increased exposure to diversity, and students are able to better understand themselves. The second article is from the perspective of doctors and nurses in British Columbia. Clinicians feel unequipped when working with the LGBTQ population, and the lack of education provided can discourage teens from seeking help. Intervention at the individual and structural level will increase support in both healthcare clinicians and the population in which they serve. At a structural level, there is a lack of training and finances that would address broader issues such as outreach and concrete services. And services would increase community support and cultural competence, which would enable healthcare professionals to create a more comfortable experience for the LGBTQ population. The third article talks about how LGBTQ community educates and shares experiences with one another through the use of libraries and internet. It speaks about the global interactions and the cultural differences, and the internet can be a place for support, anonymity, and connection for people to share. It speaks about how librarians can provide a safe space for education, expression, and community building through books, and some of the barriers that librarians face globally are censorship and poverty. Books show the physical representation of the LGBTQ experience, existence, and expression, and this representation matters. Integrating sexual health education for the LGBTQ community in school will reduce stigma and fear in this community. It will normalize the experience and bring self-acceptance. It is accepting of diversity. LGBTQ sexual education information is needed, and individuals are seeking it on many levels, and this incorporation of LGBTQ sexual education in schools is important for all. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Hola, my name is Jasmine Marbella Vargas, and I'm a Fordham University United Nations intern. I'm currently receiving my Master of Social Work at Fordham University. I'm Dominican American, and I'm interested in the topics of global health, education, and gender equality. Today, I will be discussing the implications of poverty in the Dominican Republic with the public health issue of maternal mortality, which is one of the leading causes of death of women in the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic, a third world country, is centralized in the Caribbean region. Its main language is Spanish. It's known for tourism. The people are centralized and focused on hospitality and the sweet nature that characterizes Dominicans. Within the context of a humanitarian lens, many humanitarian workers are sent to try to remedy the issue of maternal mortality and morbidity in the Dominican Republic. However, the biggest discrepancy is that the workforce is not adequately skilled, and by that I mean many healthcare workers are sent to the Dominican Republic do not meet the qualified standards of addressing this issue. What must be done from a humanitarian perspective and lens is provide 1, world aid to the Dominican Republic, and 2, skilled labor and trained skilled labor workers to try to remedy this issue of maternal mortality and morbidity in the Dominican Republic. Thank you so much. I look forward to receiving this presentation and delivering it all to you. And I appreciate your presence and thank you so much.
Greetings to all. I am Maggie Mikhail. I am a New York entrepreneur and lawyer based in the Dominican Republic for the past 20 years. It is an honor to be part of the International Health Awareness Network, IHAN, and this conference. I firmly believe that the empowerment, education, and health of women and girls are crucial to obtaining gender equality and also contributes to a more peaceful world. Therefore, I entirely agree, support, and am very proud of the work of IHAN. I became an IHAN volunteer during my first year at Columbia College and participated in IHAN's Children's Immunization and Health Program in Mundini, Kenya in 1989. Later, I did research for IHAN on the tremendous effects of female genital mutilation in girls and certain African countries. For approximately 20 years, I have been on IHAN's advisory board. In this capacity, in March 2016, I cooperated so that IHAN, with the generous support of its board members, Dr. Sarush Roshan, Dr. Gabriel Casper, as well as the Rotary Australia World Community Service and the DAC Foundation, could donate a portable ultrasound unit, transvaginal probe, and sonotrack fetal Doppler to Clínica La Familia in La Romana province of the Dominican Republic. Clínica La Familia's Adolescence, Maternal, and Infant module provides family planning, HIV rapid test with pre and post counseling, pregnancy test, prenatal consultation, including treatment for HIV vertical transmission prevention, psychological consultation, gynecological consultation, pediatric consultation, boys clinic, and sexual and reproductive education. This module now operates from the Francisco Gonzalo Public Hospital. Currently, the donated equipment serve the 2,000 member community of the Cucama Rural Public Clinic, also in the province of La Romana, in alliance with Clínica La Familia. This rural clinic is able to provide primary health services to a previously underserved poor community where the mere cost of transportation to the center of the nearest town is simply prohibitive for its members. The outreach, monitoring, follow-up, and education services have immediately impacted the well-being of this community. We will first hear from Ms. Mina Halpern, Executive Director of Clínica La Familia, and subsequently from Dr. Wendy Galvez of the Cucamama Rural Clinic. The quality of treatment for patients of both clinics was dramatically improved through this generous donation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Mina Halpern. I am the Executive Director of Clínica de Familia La Romana, and it's a pleasure to be able to thank IHAN for the wonderful donation of a portable ultrasound machine, which we've used for many years at our teen clinic. We work on providing services to adolescents, reproductive health care services, including prenatal care, and so that's where we've been able to use our ultrasound machine to be able to see the health of their babies and to provide quality care to a population that oftentimes is discriminated against. We also work really hard on pregnancy prevention. So with those teens who are pregnant, we provide them with a lot of education and support so that they can have a healthy baby, but also so that they can prevent future unplanned pregnancies. We go into schools and do comprehensive sex education. And we're just so appreciative of IHAN for helping to support this really important work that we're doing in the Eastern Dominican Republic. Thank you so much.
Hola, muy buen día. Mi nombre es Wendy Galvez. Soy la doctora encargada del Centro de Atención Primaria Cucama en La Romana, República Dominicana. Estamos tratando de dar un servicio oportuno a la comunidad y por ello agradecemos la donación que nos hizo Clínica de Familia.
Thanks. I'd like to thank all the speakers. We are very, very, very behind time. So I've asked Anna if she could just divert the questions over to Rosemary Ogu, because Eleanor and Rosemary came on the webinar at midnight, so it's now 3 in the morning. So I think for their really big effort, she at least deserves some questions, and we want to know what's going on in Nigeria. We really do. So Anna, do you mind just asking your questions to Rosemary?
Absolutely. Rosemary, can you hear me?
Yes, and I can hear you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being online. It must be some very absurd hour of the morning for you. So firstly, I just wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit about your hospital and how many deliveries you do in a year.
Thank you. My hospital is Extreme Hospital, so we have medical students as well. We do about 2,000 deliveries per year. We used to do about 4,000. Now we do 2,000 deliveries a year.
Wow, that's fantastic. And from your bio, we can see that you work with the WHO. So could you tell us a little bit more about this work?
We do quite a number of things with WHO, all aimed at improving maternal health and women's health. And so the last big collaboration that we did with the WHO was the Safe Childbirth Checklist for improving maternal health and preventing maternal mortality. So Safe Childbirth Checklist, that's the last one that we did.
And how can we support your efforts in the hospital?
Wow, thank you. You know, right now we have a lot of stockouts because women are unable to pay for things. And so if we have people support, fund a project, make donations, anesthetic pack, delivery packs, that would really be nice. Anyone who wants to support can reach us through Professor Kasper. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you very,
Thank
very,
you.
very
It's
much.
nice to be here.
And Rosie, and Eleanor, both of you, thank you for coming on. This is a terrible hour for you. Really, really appreciate it. And I think that you work under
3
difficult circumstances. Or is it 3 a.m.? Thank you very much. You go to bed now. Go to bed.
All right, bye. Bye, everyone.
We're nearly an hour behind, so we'll quickly move on to the impact of migration, climate change, and COVID on women and girls. And after that, we'll move straight on to equity for women doctors. So we won't have a break between the two. We'll just catch up a bit of time. I'm just scared we'll get cut off otherwise.
My name is Marciana Popescu, and I'm an associate professor at Fordham University in New York City and an avid advocate for women's rights. When thinking of gender equality, one important starting point is to unpack the layers of inequality and implicitly the engines of marginalization that pushed women, girls, LGBTQ communities to the margins historically, limiting their access to resources, visibility, and representation. We are now dealing with a global pandemic, a global public health crisis that some might think would be a great equalizer because viruses do not discriminate, right? Except when structures that we created and supported are already setting some people at high risk. So what would be the most significant impact of this pandemic on women migrants? As migrant women represent approximately 74% of the service industry, according to the IOM's World Migration Report, and over half of people currently on the move due to forced migration, according to UNHCR reports, women numerically, they already are the most affected. IOM's report summarizes main challenges during this pandemic for women migrants under 5 major categories: job insecurity and exploitation with major economic losses, stigmatization and increased xenophobia and marginalization, high risk to get infected, overload of care work by being the de facto caregivers and in many instances the sole breadwinners. Migrant women's exposure to the virus is significantly higher. And I would pause here to also say that this comes with greater impact on their mental health, torn between their perceived and assumed responsibilities and their own survival needs. Migrant women are experiencing heightened stress and anxiety, often building on compounded past losses, present exhaustion and lack of resources, and the fear of future loss of life among the ones they love most. And finally, increased gender-based violence. You know, it's very interesting to think of some of the protection mechanisms put in place during this pandemic, such as sheltering in place. Sheltering in place policies assume that all people have a place that is safe and secure. Shelter in place for many women on the move only mean sheltering in a refugee or IDP camp, transitional housing unit or detention center, places that do not provide any levels of safety and further expose women to the pandemic. For others, the place they are asked to shelter in is a place of violence, trafficking, and abuse. If we think of the United States, for women in the United States that are already dealing with the complexities of a dysfunctional and discriminatory immigration process and the loss of family members, community, and networks of support due to forced migration, the pandemic created multiple additional issues. It cut accesses to legal processes, increasing the state of uncertainty. Will they be allowed to continue asylum processes? Could they be removed or repatriated based on new public health policy in the US that is actually a gateway to ending asylum processes indefinitely? What will happen with children if they are deported, or if they lose their jobs and cannot provide for them anymore, or if they get sick, and so on and so forth? It created major economic problems, and this is a global issue, but it really affected women in the United States drastically, because now they either lose their jobs or they continue to work being further exposed. Parenting comes with an added challenge of remote education, which is really affected by language barriers and the technology divide. And of course, access to health and mental health care in a country that does not define healthcare as a right is even more problematic during these times. So what can be done to address these issues and provide equal protection during a pandemic that is affecting us all to women migrants? I'd say the most important element in times of high uncertainty should be rethinking availability and access of services, creating safety within a complex emergency context. Yes, by providing information, accurate information, by making sure that women feel safe, whatever services they need to use, and by making sure that we create such services. The IOM report also provides several policy recommendations that I built on to create an action plan. Redefine safety. Of course, I started with that, engaging with women to guide the planning and design of safe spaces. Ensure access to safe facilities. According to UNDP, safe facilities, especially at borders, can help reduce the risk of contagion and situations of sexual and gender-based violence. Yet current situation at the southern border is contrary to following any such standards. Provide economic safety net for all, including women migrants, through policies that facilitate their access to economic benefits, regardless of their immigration status. Provide protection equipment against COVID-19 in all migrant assistance centers, ensure access to care services without discrimination, and facilitate access to remote services, because this becomes so important during this pandemic. I will be amiss not to end by saying that we need to stop and learn from the amazing resilience of women migrants, yet not use this resilience to justify our apathy or the continuous marginalization and increased invisibility of this population. Use it as capacity that we can work with the women to continue to build on, and hold governments accountable to provide equal protection and support for women and girls on the move during any such complex emergencies, because it is their right. And because if we deny other people's rights, we are, as Paulo Freire aptly said it so long ago, dehumanizing ourselves. Thank you.
Today we'll be talking about climate change and its disproportionate impact on women's health. Climate change is one of the defining issues of our time, and it's particularly relevant to the medical profession due to its significant impact upon health. Climate change affects health through a multitude of mechanisms, such as reducing air and water quality, increasing heat exposure, increasing the frequency of extreme weather events, altering transmission patterns of vector-borne diseases, and decreasing food security. These impacts affect women disproportionately, as noted by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which recognizes that women, especially those in poverty, face higher risks and experience a greater burden of impact from climate change. As a result, climate change is a risk multiplier that threatens to widen existing gender-based health disparities.
The disproportionate effect of climate change upon women's health is multifactorial, being mediated through socioeconomic, physiological, and cultural vulnerabilities, which differ substantially between men and women. Firstly, the health impacts of climate change are experienced most intensely by those in low to middle income countries, especially those in poverty, 70% of whom are females, totaling almost 1 billion women globally at high risk. The distinct physiology and health needs of women, such as increased nutritional demands during pregnancy and menstruation, and higher baseline levels of anemia and malnutrition globally, places them at risk of suffering from climate-sensitive diseases and food shortage related to food insecurity. Further, many cultural practices involving women worsen the health impacts of climate change, including poorer access to healthcare, lower educational levels, as well as culturally prescribed clothing and household roles of cooking and water provision.
It is important to note that climate change not only introduces new health challenges, but also exacerbates existing ones. Exposure to poor air quality, which often leads to secondary respiratory and cardiovascular disease, has been shown to preferentially affect women. This is mainly due to a greater deposition of particulate matter in the lung tissue of women. Poor air quality has also been associated with negative birth outcomes, such as stillbirth, intrauterine growth restrictions, and congenital defects. In addition to poor air quality, women are much more sensitive to climate-driven food insecurities. With increased nutritional needs during menstruation and pregnancy, women are at high risk of anemia and malnutrition, which in turn can lead to cognitive impairments, diminished working memory, and poor educational outcomes. Studies have also shown that during climate change-related disasters, women suffer disproportionate mortality, and survivors experience significant decrease in life expectancy in comparison to men. It is also important to highlight the effects of climate change-driven migration and displacement on women's health. Psychological stress is often heightened after disasters, and there is widespread consensus that women and girls are at higher risk of sexual violence, sexual exploitation and abuse, trafficking, and domestic violence during these times. The consequences of such violence on the health and well-being of these women are significant and numerous. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we have only managed to provide a brief snapshot of the many impacts of climate change on the health of women, and we definitely encourage you all to look further into the issue.
Climate change and gender inequality are increasingly recognised as global problems requiring integration of a gendered perspective into existing climate, development and disaster risk reduction policies. Some progress has been made from the World Health Organization, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Sustainable Development Goals. However, data collection, monitoring of gender-specific targets, and intersectoral coordination must be prioritised. Interventions addressing the largely modifiable socioeconomic, physiological, and cultural factors which mediate climate-related health impacts present climate-resilient health solutions and include improving water quality, sanitation, food security, as well as reducing malnutrition and encouraging climate-resilient farming. Finally, women must be empowered as educators, agents of social change, and most importantly, key stakeholders and problem solvers in their battle against the health impacts of climate change.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nikki Raftopoulos, and I will be speaking with Stacia De Silva and Anita Scaros on the gendered impact of COVID-19, a look at the effects on young girls, carers, and migrants. I'm currently studying medicine at the University of Notre Dame, and I feel humbled to speak at this event while we all share a passion for the rights of women. So I will be speaking specifically on the impact of COVID-19 on young girls. Substantial evidence shows outbreaks and crises compound existing inequalities and disproportionately affect young girls, mostly by the secondary impacts of the outbreak due to harmful social norms and double discrimination based on age and gender. So, in emergencies, the most vulnerable suffer the most, and so therefore it's important to consider the impact of COVID on education and on sexual and reproductive health. So firstly, onto education. COVID-19 has and will continue to disrupt early learning, formal education and livelihoods. Girls, their families and communities face extreme stress from health and economic burdens, crowding and isolation. Measures to curb the disease have worsened existing inequalities, forcing 743 million girls out of school, placing them at a heightened risk of domestic violence in their home. And also to note is that boys are more likely to own a smartphone and therefore have access to the internet, exacerbating further gender gaps in education. Furthermore, school closures have led to increased dropout rates before they complete their education, especially those living in poverty. Even before the pandemic, girls were not on course to meet minimum proficiency in basic reading and maths, which are the knowledge and opportunities they need for a productive and fulfilling life. And evidence from past epidemics show that girls are at a particular risk of dropping out and not returning to school after the crisis. Secondly, sexual and reproductive health. So when girls are out of school, they struggle to access social support structures and essential services. we have seen a global increase in domestic violence that has been described as the second pandemic. Economic downturns, job losses, and social closures will increase sexual violence, exploitation, trafficking, child labour, and harmful practices. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. So my name's Anita and I'll be talking about the impact of COVID on women as carers primarily. So during times of pandemic or health crises, we do kind of see the cracks start to show and the gender inequalities really come to the surface. So there are two real ways in which COVID-19 has affected women as carers. One, the first is through paid work, as women make up majority of the healthcare frontline, and the second is through unpaid work, so caring for sick family members and also caring for school children who are now at home. So firstly, women in the front line of the health workforce. So globally, about 70% of the health workforce is female. Interestingly, when we talk about the front line, we're talking about nurses, janitors, laundry cleaners, but unfortunately that doesn't translate to the leadership healthcare aspect, where only 20% of females are in that workforce. So in Australia, about 75% of healthcare professionals are women, and women make up 88.5% of the nursing and midwifery cohort, and that really reflects the 85% globally. So what effect does this have? So it leads to an increased exposure and spread of the virus to their family members. And globally, we do see this as infection rates are higher in female healthcare workers, which has been seen in both Spain and Italy. Now, the second prong to this is the effect on unpaid carers. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, in 191 countries, they implemented a nationwide school closure. Women spend more time caring for sick family members and also educating children that are now at home. And as Nikki mentioned earlier, temporary school closures have led to school dropout. And in low and middle income countries, this has led to women getting forced to get married younger and support their families or not be a burden on their family. So this really affects the double caregiving burden for paid care workers. So women who are in the frontline healthcare force and also looking after family members at home. So the additional demands that this places on them means that they require longer working hours and the increased risk that they place as well on their family members. And paid care workers are also at a higher risk of infection. So I'll pass over to Saisha.
Thanks, Anita. So thank you for having me talk today. I will be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on migrant women. This is a particularly vulnerable group of women as they face inequalities from the intersection of their minority status as migrants and as women. So it is known that women make up 50% of the estimated 272 million migrants who live and work outside of their home countries. Of these, 66.6 are also migrant workers and comprise a large part of the global service industry. As Anita mentioned, they also are disproportionately represented in the amount of unpaid work that they perform. Loss of livelihood. So COVID-19 has led to an economic downturn, which has seen the termination of employment for many individuals. Migrant women are particularly at risk of this as they are overrepresented in the informal economy. This means that they're vulnerable to the termination of employment, and the compromised visa status and lack of workers' authorization leaves them vulnerable to a lack of social support and isolation. It is known that remittances sent back to the migrants' home countries form a crucial part of the local economy and are used to meet basic healthcare and education needs. Unavailability of transfer services, as well as a reduction in incomes, could lead to a widespread devastation of local economies in the wake of COVID-19. Social isolation, a greater risk of domestic violence, and human rights violations are all things that can impact migrant workers and migrant women, particularly during healthcare crises. This has particularly been seen in past epidemics, and emerging evidence shows that it is becoming an issue during this COVID-19 pandemic as well. Exclusion from social safety nets due to lack of permanent resident status leads to a lack of access to healthcare insurance schemes and medical treatment. In this COVID-19 pandemic, this means that high-risk women are less likely to seek treatment for medical emergencies and less likely to get tested and treated for COVID-19, placing them at greater risk, them and their communities at greater risk of disease complications. Marginalised ethnicities and genders are more vulnerable to sexual abuse at all times. This is particularly exacerbated during times of pandemic, and it is known that the most marginalised ethnicities are the ones to normally underreport. Instances of human trafficking, sexual abuse and domestic violence all increase during times of health crises. So that brings us to the end of our talk. Thank you for having us speak today.
Hi there, my name is Madison Riley.
And my name is Grace Sutherland.
And today we'll be talking about the shadow pandemic, COVID-19 and domestic violence.
As the global COVID-19 pandemic sweeps across the globe, killing millions worldwide and devastating global economies, so too do the rates of domestic violence. In a pandemic known as the shadow pandemic, women around the world in all levels of society are experiencing unprecedented levels of abuse. 1 in 3 women experience physical and sexual violence at some point in their lives. In the week since COVID-19 restrictions, reported cases of violence against women have surged. According to the United Nations, cases of domestic violence in France have increased by 30% since lockdown, and in Argentina, emergency calls for domestic violence have increased by 25% since March 20. Google has reported a 75% spike in searches for help with domestic violence. Here in New South Wales, there has been an 11% increase in referrals through the government's Safer Pathways program.
Historically, rates of domestic violence have spiked in the face of worldwide crises. For instance, following Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the USA saw a 4-fold increase in domestic violence cases. This reflects the tendency of perpetrators to escalate violent behaviours in the face of a disaster, as we are currently seeing with this COVID-19 shadow pandemic. In order to combat this unprecedented rise in violence against women, we first must understand the unique factors that the COVID-19 pandemic poses with regard to protecting and monitoring victims of domestic violence. Foremost, lockdown restrictions have confined women to their homes, which, as we know, is the major context in which human rights violations commonly take place. Not only do lockdown restrictions trap women with violent and abusive partners, but they also create an environment whereby abuse can go unrecognised and coercive behaviours can be escalated. In addition to this, the COVID-19 restrictions significantly limit the array of both services and social supports that women would have otherwise had access to. For instance, women are less likely to come in contact with medical professionals, co-workers, friends or family members who they would normally disclose acts of violence to. Whilst essential services such as domestic violence shelters are technically still open, they too are limited in the number of women and children whom they can accommodate. Undoubtedly, pre-existing violent family dynamics have been further inflamed by the health and financial stressors that COVID-19 has placed on households. As job losses reach 20.5 million in the USA, alcohol sales steadily rise and people genuinely fear for their health and well-being, women are absolutely placed in increased risk of experiencing violence in the household.
The United Nations has issued a call to action to highlight and manage the surge of domestic violence associated with COVID-19. Governments need to ensure that domestic violence services be considered essential during the pandemic. So far, Australia has committed $150 million of extra support to victims of domestic violence, aiming to ensure that victims have safe accommodation. Additional stimulus packages for these services is necessary in a global capacity. Recently, the United Nations released the Shadow Pandemic Public Awareness Campaign to shine a light on the current domestic violence crisis. The film urges people to recognise and support women who are suffering. Given the current social restrictions, boosting online support and counselling services is necessary. However, additional measures need to be made for women who do not have access to the internet. Additionally, the police force must be educated regarding the gravity of the situation to ensure that violence against women will never be tolerated and perpetrators will be held accountable.
The shadow pandemic is a global emergency which reflects the deeply ingrained oppression of women in contemporary society. Through increased funding, public education, online support systems and involvement of the police force, we can work together to combat violence against women both during the COVID-19 pandemic and in the future.
Hello everyone, my name is Orchid Abar, and the title of my talk today is Gender Inequality in the Era of Social Media and Technology, a Millennial's Perspective. I am currently a resident physician in obstetrics and gynecology in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it is a pleasure to be with you today. Throughout my life, I hardly remember a time when the advancement of technology did not change our everyday behaviors. When I was just a toddler, I remember playing with huge computer machines and seeing how a disk the size of my hand stored data. By grade school, the computers were smaller and smaller until I could carry a laptop with just that one hand. By the time I was in high school, my cell phone was its own computer, and I had a Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram account to be in touch with my friends and family. The immense progress of technology and the rise of social media changed a lot for humans, making it easier than ever to connect with our loved ones overseas and revolutionizing the way we go about our professional and personal lives. Modern technology is a marvelous thing. It can increase accuracy and efficiency, perform tedious and redundant tasks, improve the decision-making process, and in general, make life and work a lot easier. But how did the era of technology and social media influence the course of gender equality globally? When speaking of the ubiquitousness of the internet, it's important to remember that access still remains a problem in rural areas and even urban low-income areas. But for the most part, internet access, automation, and other digital tools have helped to remove some of the barriers keeping women from pursuing educational opportunities, participating in the workplace, and having their voices heard. For example, many schools and businesses use computer algorithms to run statistics to ensure that its admissions and hiring processes, respectively, do not discriminate against female applicants. Technology has made it easier for moms to work remotely at home and sustain dual roles as caregivers for their children and professionals with distinguished careers. Social media has helped women share resources for other women, amplify their own voice about gender equality, inseminating knowledge, and promoting grassroots movements. Still, advanced technology and social media have its shortcomings. Access, as mentioned, is still a huge problem and makes gender inequality in low-income areas more pervasive because many times males are disproportionately acquiring access to technology. Another area of improvement is privacy. Social media can promote the oversharing of information and increases external pressure to be perfect online, which increases social anxiety and diminishes confidence for many women. I argue two downsides to technology and social media are that in developing areas, lack of access is widening the privileges between men and women, and that globally the oversharing of information has the unintended consequence of reduced privacy and confidence for many women. Gender inequality in the era of technology and social media is a huge topic, and I've only skimmed the surface of countless other important examples and issues for a 2-minute talk. Therefore, please feel free to contact me to discuss this topic more. I would love to speak with you. Thank you so much for listening.
As part of the section concerning equity for women doctors, I'd like to present an updated version of the talk I gave in New York last year in July for the Medical Women's International Centennial. It was entitled, Medical Women, Put Your Own Oxygen Mask On First, and I believe it's especially important during the pandemic. It's based on the principle that women need to look after their own safety so that they can care for others in a crisis, like a flight emergency. And this principle is reinforced by the Hippocratic Oath, as declared in October 2017, which states that doctors not only need to care for the autonomy and dignity of their patient and have the utmost respect for human life, but they also need to maintain their own health and well-being to provide care to the highest standard to others. Much has changed since July last year, and especially in New York, and in fact in our whole world. We now not only need an oxygen mask for our safety, we virtually need a spacesuit to protect us from the spread of the novel coronavirus. And whilst unable to attend CS63 in New York again March this year, a number of delegates from the Australian Federation of Medical Women spent 2 weeks at home in Australia considering the potential impacts of the looming medical crisis. As a result, we produced a statement on behalf of AFMW, published online just as the global pandemic was announced. This document looks with a gendered lens at the ways to reduce harm to all women and to medical women in particular during this crisis. You'll find the AFMW COVID-19 pandemic statement on our website, along with an updated release from April, and with the intention to publish a third statement as we emerge from the restrictions that have been so successful in Australia. We recognise the need to pay special attention to women during COVID-19 because women make up the majority of the healthcare workforce, and they're more likely to experience stress due to physical, psychological and financial issues. And also women have multiple caring roles, both paid and unpaid, for their patients, at work and colleagues, and in the home for partners, children and elderly parents. The health impacts on women can be considered from three angles: those directly related to the SARS-CoV infection, as well as those due to stress, as mentioned, and also from the unique physiology of women. To protect women from infection, we've been particularly concerned about personal protective equipment and making sure there's proper fitting of masks and gowns and goggles, and that there's adequate supply and training, and that there's consideration for the environment. There are special considerations for young women doctors in terms of pregnancy and breastfeeding, and we recognise that women are at greater risk of transmission because they spend more time and get closer to their patients and their colleagues, and this is well documented in research. In general, for women doctors, the least concern is for themselves, but we know that they are 4 times more vulnerable to suicide, something my colleague Dr. Ira van der Steenstraat and I addressed in an NJA Insight article in 2017. And as in our MWIA presentation together, we also recognise the many additional physical demands on our body for menstruation, pregnancy, breastfeeding and menopause. We feel that you need to ensure that your mental and physical fuel tank is full. We need to take, from the mental aspect, adequate breaks for stress relief, and with a 5 checkpoint list to remember to eat, to toilet, to move, to connect and to sleep. In addition, we recommend that women have their own GP and have regular review rather than only for a crisis. They should know their own normal values and keep their physical fuel tanks full as well. And from the hematological perspective, I'm very concerned about women being iron deficient. This is very common, but also low in the B vitamins, the all-important B12 and folate. And in the COVID context, we're concerned about vitamin C and vitamin D. And lastly, it's possible for women to know their thrombosis risk due to multiple variables, and especially their blood group. So with these measures, we can successfully navigate the COVID pandemic together as medical women. Thank you for listening and for inviting me to talk. Please refer to the website and our articles, and I look forward to meeting you in person sometime.
Hello, my name's Deb Colville. I'd like to talk about the effect of COVID on surgical training in Australia. I'm an ophthalmic surgeon and an educator, and I'm concerned about gender regression during COVID. I'm particularly going to talk about surgical training. We need to take a gender lens on surgical practice at large. Surgical practice has been affected, for example, by the shape of protective equipment. Masks don't fit for some women, and women are in the front line more commonly in COVID. So this is a gendered aspect of surgical experience and surgical training. Patients may have a delayed diagnosis, changing the acuity of their disease. In Australia, 1/3 of oncology patients and of acute stroke patients are failing to attend hospital at the moment, we believe through fear of acquiring COVID. Surgeons are moving residents away, living away from their children, away from those they usually care for at times in order to protect themselves. There's increased stress at home with close proximity of family members, children at home, homeschooling and caring responsibilities that are new and often expanded. Another feature is for dual career marriages or in situations where domestic duties need to be divided up very carefully, there are extra stresses. During training, there's interruption of training. These have been major with freezes on training times, 6 months or indefinite extension of training, leave is cancelled, and in order to retain sufficient staff in hospitals to be COVID surge ready. Role stress is a major feature, and I'm concerned that it will deteriorate post-COVID. There's no immediate end in sight. any gendered contested domestic roles at home can become more significant during this crisis. Surgical lists are lightly filled, raising questions about whether the thresholds for surgical logbooks will be achieved. Short-term hospital contracts are a tradition. Uncertainty of timing of the examinations and of leave and of completion of time-based training are an issue. Extension of training is a serious issue. It risks infertility and alters family planning, and it can cause particular disruption to surgical women, since there's a stigma still to interrupted or part-time training or any flexible training schemes. On the other hand, flexible training and flexible work life are becoming more of a norm. The economic recession risks severe impacts. Some people call this the she-cession. There's an exaggeration expected of the gender pay gap, currently 0.83, will be worse after the COVID. The current equal pay day, we call it, instead of the 1st of July, it's the 31st of August for women, and this is worse for surgeons. And there's increased stress, as I say, due to the care economy and caregiving responsibilities. So in conclusion, there's lots of opportunities, but there's also some threats, and all surgical care for any organ, any type of surgery can be considered, since gender affects surgical training, practice, the labour force, curriculum policies, and even pictures of eye care. So I look forward to meeting you face to face, perhaps at the next CSW. I look forward to meeting you online or on Zoom, and thank you to the organisers for inviting me to speak. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm very happy to be here today to talk about the mental health of women physicians. I'm going to start with the good news is that women physicians, we are very present in the medical field, and by the year 2030, half of all physicians will be women. Unfortunately though, discrimination and bias among women physicians is still very important, and it mainly affects the mental health of women physicians. Surveys show that burnout is 20 to 60% more among women physicians, and the level of suicide is 2.27 times more present also among women physicians compared to men physicians. There are many contributing factors to these important numbers. First is the work-life integration. So in general, women physicians spend 8.5 hours more weekly on childcare, parent care, and domestic activities. 1/3 of women doctors who are mothers experience discrimination, and 90% were related to pregnancy and maternity leave. And 50% also got very negative comments about their breastfeeding. Second contributing factors is the leadership inequality. So women are underrepresented in the high academic medical positions. For example, in Canada, out of the 17 medical schools, only 2 have deans who are women physicians. Third contributing factor is the salary inequality. So women physicians, we spend more time with our patients. We focus more on the psychosocial issues, and we try to involve more our patients in the treatments. And unfortunately, all these are not financially rewarding. So there's a gap of about 16% of salary in primary care for women physicians, and in specialties, the gap can go up to 37%. And last but not least, the sexual harassment. Yes, the sexual harassment is still present. 1/3 of women physicians experience sexual harassment, and among them, 40% had a very severe sexual harassment experience that affect mainly their career. Women medical students describe that usually as a crummy rite of passage. So in conclusion, we have to break this taboo in the medical field. It is an individual and collective responsibility, and poor mental health of women physicians not only affect the physician's mental health, but also affects the health of the patient, and also affects the health system in global. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I really have hope that I will meet all of you one day soon, and it will be a great pleasure to meet you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for all the speakers in both sections. They were fabulous speakers. But due to the limitation of time, Sarah, I believe that you've been looking at the questions. There's one that came up as quite a burning question. Are you there?
Yes.
Yes. What was that? Who was that?
Yes, we have a question for Dr. Hijazi. And whilst today we're talking about gender inequality, I'm aware that you produced a documentary to create awareness about depression amongst both male and female physicians called Doctors Also Cry. So I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about that with us. I'm aware that it's mandatory watching for first-year medical students in Quebec. Is this something that we as medical students here in Australia could access? And what impact do you think will it have on us? Is it going to encourage us will it sort of frighten us, or will it encourage us and help us to move away from mistakes that others in the past have made? Yes. Wonderful, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for asking this question. This documentary was made definitely for prevention. I mean, when I was a medical student, I wish there was a documentary that was done about mental health of doctor, which was taboo and is still taboo today. And it would have probably avoided for me to go through my burnout. I went through a burnout many years ago, and that was the main reason I made this documentary, to break this taboo. It took me about 2 years to be able to convince some doctors to come to the documentary, and then also to convince CBC here in Canada to do the documentary, because when I told them about the high numbers of burnout, of suicide, I mean, in my presentation, I was talking about women doctors, but it's also among men. Everybody was surprised because it's taboo, but it's there. And this documentary humanizes doctors, because we are as humans and as our patients. So we have the right to be sick. But doctors, when we get sick, we're not good patients. I mean, I have the pleasure of touring with this documentary for the last 3 years all around North America. And one of the first questions I ask all these wonderful doctors I meet is, do you have a GP? And most of them, they say no. So we don't take care of our health. And this is important. And that's why they show it as in the beginning of the medical school, the first year, because prevention is important. We have to take care of our physical and mental health to be able to take care of others. If you are sick, you cannot take care of others. So this is, I think, this is the ABC. But in medicine, and these are one of the risk factors, is because we think we are superheroes and we are not allowed to be sick. So prevention through that documentary, that's what I'm trying to do, and I give conferences. And I hope this is going to inspire the medical students, my colleagues, to continue to break this important taboo.
Thank you. Is there a way that we can access that here in Australia? Or how do we go about accessing
it? About this with my dear Dr. Gabrielle Casper. We're working on that, and hopefully I will be able to give you the documentary so you can definitely watch it. It would be my honor if you could see that in Australia. And I hope I will have the pleasure of coming to your beautiful country and meet you all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Look, I'd like to thank IHAN, the Fordham Institute, and all our wonderful speakers, all the invited guests and all the students from both University of Notre Dame and the Fordham Institute. I also in particular would like to thank Jessica, Nikki, Anna, and Sarah. They're the students who undertook the hidden work in planning and production and running everyone together. I'd also like to thank Charles Kachula and Stephen Bested, who worked very, very hard behind the scenes, as you can imagine, editing all the videos, putting all the videos together, and somehow making it work, which it did do. So, and of course, I want to thank all of IHAN, but Sarosh naturally. But anyway, although this event was held at the Commission of the Status for Women, so whilst gender inequality is a broad topic, we did limit our discussion to issues relating to women's inequality, and that's simply because we were meant to have been at the Commission on the Status of Women. It's not that we don't care about other inequalities. However, I do believe it is only when men and women work together to rid this world of women's inequality that things are going to change. And together we will make a difference. As it is currently topical, just as I keep hearing chanted, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, I want to keep chanting back, and women's lives matter, women's lives matter, because I don't think that voice has been loud enough for the whole of my life. And if it had been, maybe we wouldn't even need to say it now, because we would have equality. Death to women's inequality, death to violence against women, long live IHAN. The time for gender equality, in my opinion, is now. And I'd like to head over for the final words of wisdom to my wonderful mentor of 25 years, Dr. Sarosh Rashan.
Hi, everyone. It's been a long evening, but every speakers have been wonderful. All the participants that you have been patient and listening to all the lectures, I thank you from bottom of my heart. And I want to share with you, for me, was the most enjoyable evening. I saw my daughters from all these years becoming superstar. Dr. Hijazi, I took to Turkey with me. I think she was perhaps 20 years of age.
Yes, sure.
Mikohi took to Kenya. She was 20 years of age. And of course, Orchid, I delivered Orchid myself, Orchid Babar. Now she's an obstetrician gynecologist. So although you had a long evening, but I really enjoyed it. So I thank you from bottom of my heart. All the organizers, Charlie, who did all the videos, all the late night calls that my dear friend, my other daughter, Gabrielle, called me 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and I had to say, Gabrielle, I need to sleep. We talk tomorrow, please. So it's been a monumental task, a lot of devotion and hard work. Thank you all. A special thank to Gabrielle, my daughter, who really has put a lot of effort in this. But I am so happy to share with you all that Professor Gabrielle Kasper has accepted to be our next president-elect. So tonight was my grand finale. And I thank you from bottom of my heart. Have a good evening. And my friends in Australia, have a great day. Thank you, thank you, thank you.